Coverage here on C-SPAN.
You inspired our founders, emboldened a ragtag revolutionary army, and carried us to independence. You preserved us through calamity, secured our union, and expanded our frontiers. You guided and protected the pioneers and explorers that trekked across this land, forged its rivers, scaled its mountains, and conquered its deserts and great salt basins. You helped settlers as they chiseled rock, hoed soil, hewed timber, planted fields, and harnessed cascades and torrents. Because you were with them, O Lord, they persevered and built out of the wilderness this great nation, from Maine to California, from Florida to Alaska, from Texas to Hawaii. And so, Almighty God and Heavenly Father, we join now with the prayer of the father of our country, George Washington, in asking you to keep these United States in thy holy protection. Dispose all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with that charity, humility, and temper of mind which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, and without an humble imitation of whose example in these things we can never hope to be a happy nation. I end our prayer tonight as President Washington did his. Grant our supplication, we beseech thee, through Jesus Christ our Lord. And everybody said, amen and amen.
We are now going to have entertainment from a very special guest. Hailing from the great state of Texas, please welcome national recording artist and singer Krista Branch.
It's our time to take a stand. Remember who we are. Remember who we are. There's a call across this land. Remember who we are. Remember who we are. We were a city.
My name is Krista Branch, and I come to you by way of Nashville, Tennessee. I was born and raised in Texas, and then lived in Oklahoma, and then recently moved to Nashville. So I'm excited to be here in D.C., especially with the weather that was here today. Man, oh man, it was beautiful. I am really here because of one song that about a year and a half ago was written by my husband, who was sitting at home watching the news, and it was during the height of the healthcare debate, and something was said along the lines of, you know, the Tea Party, well, they're not real grassroots, they're just AstroTurf. And and the American people really want this healthcare bill passed. So my husband is, you know, passionate, going, what? I'm America too. And being a songwriter, what they do is they express themselves in song. So so he wrote a song, and it has been, man, it has really just hit a nerve all across the nation. I've been invited to sing at events just like this and tea parties all around the country over the past year. It's been amazing, and I would like to share that for you now. This is I Am America.
I
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of America's leading conservative leaders, President of American Values, Mr. Gary Bauer.
Hello, how are you all doing? Fantastic music, right? I hate to follow music, but that was good music. Well, this is a great-looking crowd. I'm talking fast because I got 10 minutes and I got about 4 hours worth of things I'd like to say to you. Look, seriously, it's great to be here. It's great to see so many people stepping up to the plate with Ralph Reed as we get ready to go into one of the most important elections the country has ever faced. I want to talk to you about two quick issues. One, a foreign policy issue, and one, a domestic issue, because I think both of these issues are extremely important about the upcoming presidential race. And both of these issues could teach the Republican nominees something about how to win. A few weeks ago, President Obama, for I think the third or fourth time in his 2.5 years in the presidency, once again tried to undermine our most reliable friend and ally in the world and in the Middle East, the nation of Israel. I watched as Benjamin Netanyahu flew here from Israel, went into a private meeting with the president. We don't know exactly what happened there. We know it went an hour longer than it was supposed to go. But we saw what happened in the Oval Office when it was finished. The president and the prime minister sitting there. The president making a vacuous, empty statement. The prime minister, with the respect that is due the president, any president, but nonetheless firmly, looked the president in the eye and basically said to him, Mr. President, you don't understand the Middle East. You think this is about a little piece of land, a little sliver of land, that will satisfy this enemy. This enemy won't be satisfied until every Jew has been driven into the sea. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been in Washington for 40 years. I was in government with Ronald Reagan for 8 years. I've seen heads of states from all over the world come and meet with many different presidents. I have never seen a world leader handle a president of the United States and school him in the realities of the world as did Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm just sorry we can't find a Hawaiian birth certificate for Benjamin, because then we could run him for president. You know? Look, my friends, the reason I bring this up, I do not want to hear the Republican presidential nominee, whoever that ends up being, running a campaign of caution, telling us later, well, in that debate, it's easy for you to say, but I couldn't go up there on a stage and say that to the president. Benjamin Netanyahu sat in the Oval Office with the president and was willing to confront him with the truth. The least thing that a Republican presidential nominee can do is confront this president and tell him the truth about his failures. Now, let me talk to you really quickly about a domestic issue. There's only 2 times in American history where the Supreme Court of the United States has taken a whole class of Americans and said of them, you are not covered by the promises of the American founding. You see, the whole idea of America is in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. Right in the middle of that paragraph, there are 21, 22 words. They are the central idea of America. Our kids, most of them, don't know the words. I know you do, but most of our kids don't know them because American elites don't believe them, and so they won't teach them. Let me remind you what the words are. We hold these truths. Now you see, the left has a problem right away. Right? Because they're moral relativists. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator. Note to the American Civil Liberties Union, that's God. Endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. It means rights that cannot be taken away, rights that cannot be surrendered. See, the founding, as you know, was based on the idea that rights don't come from government, they come from God. Endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these the right to life, the first right listed. Even before sonograms, our founders knew that without the right to life, the other rights are sort of beside the point. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, that's what America's about. In the 1850s, a slave runs away from his owner. Dred Scott was his name. He's recaptured. A big legal dispute breaks out. What are we going to do with Dred Scott? One side said, well, he's a man, and one man can't own another man, so he should be free. Sounds reasonable to me. The other side argued, no, you see, he's property. He's the equivalent of a horse. And when you find lost property, it's returned to its owner. The Supreme Court of the United States said, yep, that's the argument we believe. He's a horse. One of the most shameful moments in our history. Divided brother against brother, father against son, state against state, almost destroyed this nation. By the time it was over, 600,000 Americans were dead. Now you would think the Supreme Court, having made a mistake like that no future Supreme Court would ever repeat it. But in 1973, the court had a decision in front of it that was the same argument. What is that in the womb? Is it a little human being? Well, if it is, then it's protected by those 22 words in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. But if it's a styrofoam cup or a hunk of tissue, well then it's not intended to have any rights at all. The Supreme Court of the United States looked at that thing in the womb and said, you have no rights we are bound to respect. My friends, at the worst part of the Civil War, people came to Lincoln and said, Mr. President, how much longer will God allow this war to continue? And Lincoln said, I don't know the mind of God, but here's what I fear, that God will allow it to continue until enough blood has been shed north and south to equal all the blood drawn by the slave master's lash. What would America today have to pay a just God for all the ripped flesh, all the broken bones, all the spilled blood of 1 million+ abortions every year since 1973? My friends, this election will be about the economy. That's the natural thing it should be about. This president has failed American inventors, American investors, American entrepreneurs, American working men and women. But these issues will come up too. There's no truce on the social issues. We have a president that is at war with our values on the sanctity of life, on the meaning of America. Ladies and gentlemen, when this issue comes up in those debates, the Republican presidential nominee better make the case I just made without shame or embarrassment. If he or she makes that case, and if you work like I know you will work, then I believe in a little over 1.5 years, this nightmare will end and we will have a chance again to make America a shining city upon a hill. God bless you. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of America's leading critics of the secular left, S.E. Cupp.
Hello, all. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce the next speaker, not just because Donald Trump is a man to admire for so many reasons, and not because he is a man who almost, very nearly, kinda sorta, was this close from becoming a presidential candidate. But because, as a fellow New Yorker who rises and sleeps in the shadow of the very skyline he helped to create, I like to think I have a special understanding of who he is. You see, as bizarre as Washington is, New Yorkers are a special kind of crazy. And with all due respect to the Hill and the Beltway, our crazy makes your crazy look like kid stuff. Just ask Mr. Trump, who recently spent a few weeks with Gary Busey. May I just say, he handled that lunatic with refreshing aplomb, because let's face it, in the colorful panoply of New York crazy, Gary Busey is no big deal, really. There's a Gary Busey in every subway station in the city. There's one in every deli. Gary Busey is, in fact, every super I have ever had. Now, being crazy isn't entirely our own fault. New York is total sensory overload. From Times Square to Wall Street, Broadway to Soho, and those other boroughs. There is so much to do and see and eat and hear. I mean, we have 9 pro sports teams and the Mets. I can say that because I'm a long-suffering Mets fan. It's okay. So there's so much stimulus in New York City, so many distractions, it's a wonder we can function at all. And it's no surprise then that we are very hard to impress and have very limited attention spans, which is why Mr. Trump's singular ability to endure all these years, to rebuild, to reinvent, reinvigorate, readjust, revamp, to keep inspiring, to keep making an impression, to keep being relevant, is not just some sales trick or magician's sleight of hand. It's something only a New Yorker can truly appreciate. I mean, we don't have time for anything in New York. The last time I ate a meal without performing some other task simultaneously, just sat and ate, was during the 2003 blackout. True story. We are so busy and distracted. In fact, we didn't even realize that Michael Bloomberg has been mayor for 8 terms and 32 years. Just didn't even know. And even though everyone here in DC seems totally obsessed with Wienergate, let me tell you, in New York, where he is actually our congressman, we don't know who he is. Most New Yorkers will tell you that Anthony Weiner is probably some kind of butcher shop in Little Italy. We don't have time for Wienergate. But as distracted and crazy as we all are, New Yorkers are also incredibly tough. Mr. Trump knows that too. We hear, you can't do that. and say, oh yeah, watch me. We look at the hole where the World Trade Center used to be and say, just try it again, we dare you. And lucky for Mr. Trump's real estate ventures, we look at the economy and say, what recession? But there's a resilience and a sense of adventure that a New Yorker has, and it's that resilience and sense of adventure that have defined who Donald Trump is. He's an entrepreneur, a capitalist, a businessman, a deal maker, a television star, and a boardroom showman. He's also a father, a husband, a patriot, and a proud American. He is an ardent defender of free enterprise, free markets, a strong national defense, American exceptionalism, freedom, faith, family, the Second Amendment, and the right to life. In short, as conservatives, we have to appreciate someone like Donald Trump and his values, and be grateful that we have him on our side in whatever capacity we can get. You should know that when Ralph Reed announced that Mr. Trump was speaking, ticket sales exploded. And because he and every other presidential candidate and potential candidate are here this weekend, there are 3 times as many attendees here this year as last. And so conservatives should appreciate Mr. Trump. But as much as they can appreciate him, I will say, only a New Yorker can truly understand what makes him great. Ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump.
Thank you very much. Wow. What a group. What a nice group. First of all, when Ralph asked me to come and speak, I said, you know, I have on my desk a picture, and I think they're going to put it up. And you know what that picture is? That's my confirmation class. What a group to tell, right? This is Donald Trump, confirmation. There it is with the arrow. A wise guy. I was in a little trouble. But that's confirmation class, First Presbyterian Church, Jamaica, New York. Good, right? I mean, that doesn't always play, but in this crowd it plays, all right? Then somebody said, are you pro-life? And the answer is, I'm pro-life. I'm against gun control, and we have to get rid of Obamacare. You know that, right? All right? We have to. Now, the last time I was in Washington, you probably read something about it, I went to a thing called the Washington Correspondents' Dinner. Has anybody ever heard of this thing? And I walked in, and the press went crazy. I was leading the polls. And by the way, when I decided that I maybe wouldn't do it, I was also leading the polls. I like leading the polls. But I was at the Washington Correspondents' Dinner, and the press was going wild. Will the president be speaking about you, Mr. Trump? Will he say anything? I said, I have no idea. Probably not, but I have no idea. So I'm with my wife, and what happens is the president starts. And in all fairness, he was very respectful and very nice. And he just kept speaking about Donald Trump. And he kept going about the birth certificate, which, by the way, I got him to show. I got him to show. And nobody else could get him to do it. You know the Clintons wanted to do it, and they wanted him to show it. And McCain and everybody else wanted him to show it. And Trump got him to show it. Now, you know, I don't know exactly what he showed, but, you know, someday somebody's going to figure that one out. Took a long time. So I go in, and he's speaking about Donald Trump for a big majority of his speech. And I'm knocking my wife under the table. I'm saying, honey, can you believe this? The president's talking about me. This is great. What an honor. What a great honor. It's great. I had a good time. And I sat there. I wanted to be a little stone-faced. I'm not going to be laughing and everything, but I was nice. I was cordial. But I'm telling Melania, isn't this great? The next day I wake up, and about 90% of the papers said Trump was humiliated. I was so honored. And that's part of really part of the problem that the Republicans are going to have. Nobody is protected like Barack Hussein Obama. Nobody. Nobody. I have never seen press that is so protective of a human being before. And you know, I was thinking, he was over in England, and he made a horrendous toast at a very inappropriate time. And then he signed the ledger, or the registrar, as they would call it, May of '08. So he was off 3 years. And I was saying to myself, I wonder what would have happened if George Bush signed it May of '08. I wonder what would have happened if almost anybody was 3 years off. And the next day I watched the news, and they're saying, isn't that cute? Isn't that wonderful? Oh, that was so funny when he signed it. Oh, he's so smart. It was so funny. And this is a problem. We have a man who is being very, very much protected by the press. And it's going to be very difficult. But I'll tell you something about beating President Obama. If you remember, you know, they all talk about he's a great campaigner, he's this. If you remember the end of his campaign during the primaries with Hillary, she was winning every single primary. And he limped over the finish line, barely, barely. And had that been a little bit later, had there been one or two of those early primaries, he would have lost. So, you know, they keep saying, oh, he's a great campaigner. He may be a good campaigner. But, you know, in golf they have an expression. They say, Johnny, he's looking for the clubhouse. He was looking for the clubhouse. And then you had a problem with the economy, and he got in. And the problem that we have now is unbelievable because the economy has gotten a lot worse, probably will get a lot worse. The jobs report today, I don't know if you have seen your television sets, but the jobs report today was a total disaster. And it's a problem. It's a real problem. We're up to 9.1%, but it's really not 9.1. It's 19 to 20 to 21%. That's the real number. We owe more as a country than $14 trillion. You know, it's funny. 2-3 years ago, you never heard the word trillion. It wasn't a word. Nobody knew what it meant. Today, all you hear is trillion. But we owe more than $14 trillion. And I'll tell you, we need a president. And I think one of the reasons that I have done so well and continue to do so well in terms of a popularity is not because of me. It's because of what I say, because it's basic, it's true, it's common sense, it's business. We need to create a wealthy country again or we're going down the tubes. I mean, we are on a very slippery slope. And if we don't create wealth in this country soon, it's going to be a very, very long and ugly period of time. Now, if you look at what's going on with OPEC, they are laughing at our leaders. They do think our leaders are stupid. You do know that, okay? And you know, the nice part about not being a politician, I can use a word like stupid freely, okay? A politician, I mean, a politician doesn't want to do that. You look at Anthony Weiner. Was it your picture or not? He gives you about 2.5 paragraphs and nobody knows what he meant. Of course it was his picture. Take a look at those skinny legs. You think that's anybody else? I mean, did you ever hear a guy, well, I don't know, it could be, but you know, they're tampering with it. Oh, good, what does that have? Is it your picture or not? But this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people that either don't know They don't have a clue. They don't want to know, or in some cases, say whatever they have to say just to get elected. And that's a problem. And that's a big problem. Now, OPEC is having a tremendous time at our expense. Think of Libya. Think of what they do. The Arab League. You know what the Arab League is? Saudi Arabia and a couple. And I, by the way, I have many friends in Saudi Arabia. They buy apartments from me all the time. I like them. They're nice people. I'm not blaming them. I'm blaming our very, very inept leadership. So they say, attack Libya. Attack Libya. Oh, okay, we'll attack Libya. So we're spending billions of dollars attacking Libya. Nobody even knows what's happening. Who are they bombing? How many people are they killing? Where are these bombs landing? And the only one they haven't gotten is the one they want to get. But why doesn't somebody, as an example, say, okay, we're going to attack them. We want $5 billion. You know what that is for Saudi Arabia? Like nothing. It's nothing. And the other countries of the Arab League. Instead, Obama comes out, he's all thrilled because the Arab League wants us to, we have approval from the Arab League. We have approval. We don't have their money, but we have approval. So when I look at things like that, now, if you remember the last problem we had, oil hit $148 a barrel. Well, oil is going up there again, and now it's at 100, and it's going higher. And Saudi Arabia, by the way, a couple of weeks ago announced that they're going to cut back on oil because they want to get the price higher. I'm actually amazed because they're going to destroy the economies of the world, and ultimately they're going to have their own revolution, and we won't be able to protect them for free anymore. You know, we protect them. We protect South Korea. When you think of what we did. Now, I said something that some people considered, they really considered it to be somewhat controversial. In the old days, we would have wars. To the victor belong the spoils. Now, in the old days, we go to war, and if we win, we have the country. If we lose, we get the hell out, right? All right? So we go into Iraq. We spend about 1.5, think of this, $1 trillion. And by the way, then a certain Republican representative, 2 nights ago I watched on television, Representative Cantor, who I like, said we don't want to give money to the tornado victims. And yet in Afghanistan we're spending $10 billion a month, but we don't want to help the people that got devastated by tornadoes, wiped out, killed, maimed, injured. We don't have money for them, but we're spending $10 billion a month in Afghanistan. We're spending billions of dollars in Iraq, where they have the second largest oil fields in the world. We're spending billions and billions of dollars, and we can't help people that got flooded with the Mississippi, that got hit horribly by the tornadoes. And then what's going to happen? We're going to leave Iraq, and as sure as you're sitting there, and by the way, this is not 95%, this isn't 99%, this is 100%. It's already being planned. Iran will take over Iraq, maybe without firing a shot because we have decapitated their army. You know, for years and years and years, they had sort of equal power. So one would go this way, one would go that way, one would drop a bomb, another would drop another bomb. A couple of years go by, they get tired, they go back home. Okay? This is what happened. But we've decapitated one of those armies. And they're waiting for us to leave because, and a lot of people don't know it, Iraq has the second largest oil fields in the world. Now, they haven't utilized it properly, you know, not the most efficient operation, but the oil is under the ground. And we're going to leave, and Iran is going to go in and take over the oil fields, 100%. They're going to take over the oil fields, and then they're going to make a fortune. And they're going to, by the way, try and take over the Middle East. And Israel's in big, big trouble, and we're not going to be prepared to go. And we're not, I'll tell you what. A friend of mine comes up to me last week. Oh, Don, we're having a party for Barack Obama, for Israel. We're going to raise money for Israel. I say, he's the worst thing that ever happened to Israel. Are you crazy? And they don't know this. They don't get it. People don't get it. So I made the statement, and it was strong, and it was very strong. I made it a couple of months ago, that we should take the $1.5 trillion that we put into Iraq, and we should take it. I mean, I actually said take more than that. I said take the whole frickin' deal, okay? But I want to be reasonable. I want to be reasonable. How about $1.5 trillion with interest, okay? At 22%. So I made the statement, we should go in and take the oil that we deserve. We won the war. We should take the oil. And by the way, we should reimburse ourselves and we should reimburse our allies, because we did have allies, believe it or not, who really spent tremendous amounts of money and lives. And we should take this oil and we should give a couple of $1 million each, this is peanuts, to the families of the soldiers that were killed. And we should give $1 million or $2 million to every soldier that was severely wounded. I mean, I see it in New York where these incredible, young, beautiful, brave people, no legs, no arms, just horrible what's happened to them. And we should give them money, $1 million, $2 million. This is out of, by the way, it's an interesting number. They say that Iraq has $15 trillion worth of oil. What did I say our deficit was? Very close. Right? So we should give our soldiers and the families of our soldiers money. Now, this sounds like a lot of money. It's peanuts. This is peanuts when you look at what those oil wells produce and can produce. And we should take care of the families. And we should take care of our country, because our country is in such trouble. Such trouble. So, I mentioned this, and I didn't even think it would be controversial. What do I know? I mean, to me, it's common sense. We won the war. We're going to take some oil. We're going to pay ourselves back. And I was killed. This guy, Charles Krauthammer, whoever he is, gets on Bill O'Reilly. Well, Donald Trump doesn't know what he's talking about. That's a sovereign nation. Sovereign nation? Iraq's going to have it. I mean, Iraq, the people that we supposedly put in are much closer right now to Iran than they are to the United States. So there's no sovereign nation. But I was lambasted by guys like Krauthammer and others saying, what a horrible idea that is, what a foolish idea that is. He cannot be serious. I am totally serious, I will tell you. Then we get to my second favorite subject, which is China. My favorite's OPEC. I mean, in terms of abuse, you know, we call them the abusers. The biggest abuser, the biggest, by far, is OPEC. But raising and rising fast is China, because what China is doing to this country is unbelievable. They are manipulating their currency. They are making it impossible for us to compete with them by a phony manipulation of currency. They don't make products as good as our products, by the way, and I will tell you that because I'm forced to buy a lot of Chinese products, and I have plenty of problems with the stuff I buy. If you build a building, the curtain wall, 5 of them, they come from China. You build a building, the furniture. I order televisions. Where do the televisions come from? South Korea. And then we protect South Korea. And they pay us nothing. They pay us nothing. So we have problems in this country. We have problems that are solvable with the right leadership. If we get the right leadership, we have a chance to be great again. And we have a chance to be great again rapidly. So, I love this country. I want this country to be great. I want you and everybody to choose the right leader. We have to make a change. We have to use our intelligence. We have to use intelligent people. And again, the United States has a fantastic chance to be great again, and we must do that. We just have no choice, because if we don't make a change at the top, we are going over the ledge. So it's been an honor to be with you. I flew in from New York. I know so many of you people. I love you, and good luck. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald Trump. Thank you, Donald Trump. I just wish I could figure out where he stood on the issues. Well, I am really pleased to bring to the podium our next speaker tonight. He and I have been on opposite sides in the past, and now we're on the same team. In 1996, when our next speaker was an advisor to President Bill Clinton, I was then at the Christian Coalition. But he has since come over to the side of light. He is one of the most brilliant political strategists in the world. He has helped to elect 14 presidents and prime ministers all over the globe. He is the author of 10 New York Times best-selling books. He has a website you may have heard of, dickmorris.com, ffcoalition.com right here. We will not be replacing this with dickmorris.com during his remarks. He may mention it a few times. More importantly, he's become a dear friend of our movement, and he will go anywhere and do anything he can to help us build the grassroots. He's somebody who's a sought-after paid speaker, but he agreed to come here tonight simply as a favor to you and what you're trying to do. He's going to be signing copies of his book, Revolt, right in the back of the room immediately following his address. Please welcome syndicated columnist, Fox News commentator, and political strategist, Dick Morris.
Well, 2 years ago, The Economist announced the recession's over. Y'all having a good time? Yeah. But you know what? They're right. The recession is over. It ended 2 years ago. The boom and the bust cycle, the ups and the downs of the business cycle ended. And what we have now, 10% unemployment, no economic growth to speak of, no wage growth. This is the new normal. This is what it's going to be like forever until we get rid of Barack Obama. Forever. He has imposed a reign of terror on our economy. Consumers are scared to death if they're the top 2% of the country and they spend 33% of the money in the country. He's got tax increases waiting for him just around the road. Whenever I hear Obama urging me to spend more, I feel like a hog at the Chicago stockyards. We have plans for you. Manja, we have ideas for you. And the medical industry. Who on earth would open a GI clinic and install a MRI or a CAT scan when next year he doesn't know what the reimbursement rate's going to be? He'll probably be illegal, or they'll reimburse his bus fare, and that's it. So 17% of our economy is paralyzed, the medical industry. The manufacturing industry, are you kidding me? With the National Labor Relations Board jamming unions down their throats. By the way, manufacturing employment in the United States is down by 50%. Manufacturing production is up by 50% in the last 10 years. That's because we've automated. But now Obama wants to tax energy with his cap and trade and his carbon regulations. So who's going to expand their manufacturing industry in the United States? And the energy industry, he's against coal. He's putting every restriction he can in the way of natural gas. He's stopping frack horizontal drilling that could make us the new Saudi Arabia. I mean, how much of windmills are we going to have, huh? And then the banking sector. He's going around telling banks, I'll buy your mortgage-backed securities. And they say, are you out of your mind? They're worthless. And he says, yeah, well, I'll buy them for $100 million. But I use them to wallpaper my bank. And he said, don't worry, I'll take them. And then with that $100 million, I want you to lend that out and stimulate the economy. It's QE2. And then a guy from the Treasury Department comes up and says, hey, what are you planning to do with that money? And the banker says, those guys have a real estate deal over there, and those people want to open a new factory, and these kids have a fantastic new idea on the internet, and those folks need car loans and mortgage loans. And the Treasury Department says, that's great. That's just what the president wants. Use that money to create jobs. Are you sure they're all going to pay back every penny? Well, maybe. I tell you why I'm asking, because the Dodd-Frank bill says if they don't, I find you to be an imprudent lender, I close your bank, I merge it into a larger bank, I fire you, I get rid of your board of directors, I liquidate your stock, which includes your pension, but lend money. And then the banker says, gee, got me scared to death. What am I going to do with this $100 million this moron gave me for worthless pieces of paper? They say, I'm glad you asked that question. I'm a little short this quarter. Lend it to me. And I can assure you, I'll find me a very prudent risk. And then he says, how much am I going to get for it? And we say 3.5%. 3.5%? I got it for nothing for these worthless pieces of paper. My board is going to have a champagne brunch for me when I tell them I'm getting 3.5 points on this. And I'm not going to lend a penny of it to anybody in the country. All of it's going to go to the government. So what we're doing is printing money, giving it to people, and borrowing it back at 3.5% interest. It's pretty cool. So nobody will make loans, nobody will create jobs, nobody will expand their factories, nobody will expand health care, and you wonder why we don't have any economic growth in the United States. And it is all because of the policies of one man. But that which the hand of man has done, the hand of man can undo. And that's what we're going to do in 2012. Undo it. Free our economy. Get rid of these constraints. We're going to send a message to manufacturing. Go ahead and exploit the world market like you always have. We're not going to tax your carbon. We'll tell the banks, go ahead and make loans, take risks. We're not going to close you down. You small banks didn't cause this crisis. We're not going to penalize you for it. Medical industry, you're free. You can now grow and be the world's resource. And consumers, we're not going to raise your taxes. And then you will be amazed at what happens. You will be astonished. Now, when I come to Washington, I'm shocked, always, by the cultural difference between Washington and the United States of America. One of the problems in Washington is the water is impure. It's got something in it that makes you liberal, makes you vote for new taxes. You come here determined to cut the budget, and you end up accepting a phony deal that John Boehner cooks up with Barack Obama to cut 45 cents, not counting pennies. And there's something in the water supply. Now, when the water is contaminated, you know what to do. You boil it. And then when it's boiling, you throw in a tea bag. But here in Washington, everybody believes that Barack Obama is going to get reelected. Well, I've gotten a president of the United States elected, and let me tell you, this is a one-term wonder. Let me tell you, this is a one-term wonder. Ralph Reed taught me that, and I looked it up and he's right, Barack Obama got the same percentage of the white vote as Al Gore did. The difference was he had twice as many young people voting, and that shifted them from the older people who voted against him and the young people who voted for him, and it ended up evening out. And that African Americans cast 14% of the vote, not 11% that they had before. And Latino vote rose 1.5 points, and he carried it by a huge margin as opposed to Kerry, who almost lost it. Well, are those three groups going to come out for him again? Are the young people that are facing unemployment, graduating with worthless degrees, seeing the fraud that this president is, do you think they're going to come out and vote? Do you think that Latinos watching unemployment, seeing a president who steps all over their values, they're pro-life and all of that, and when he had 60 votes, didn't move on immigration reform, and now is lamenting how horrible it is that it didn't pass, are they going to turn out in droves? No. And blacks will, but come on. It's not the first time it's been a black president. And they'll vote 98% for him, but probably 11 to 13% turnout, not the 14 that it was. So it isn't that people are going to vote with their hands against Barack Obama. They're going to vote with their feet. They're going to stay home. They're not going to come out. And we, by working the grassroots, by explaining to the elderly that their very survival, as opposed to rationing, depends on defeating Obama, by explaining to working people that their entire future depends on defeating Barack Obama, by explaining to people throughout the United States that the greatness, the uniqueness, the incredible creativity and optimism and energy of the United States depends on defeating Barack Obama. We're going to defeat him. Bye-bye, Barack.
Ladies and gentlemen, author Dick Morse is going to have a special limited time only book signing at the back corner of the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of the leaders of the conservative movement for over 20 years, the president and chairman of the Americans for Tax Reform, Grover Norquist.
When midgets play miniature golf, do they know? One wonders. Second thought, Ralph Reed has put together a powerful and important Faith and Freedom Convention this weekend. I think we should also appreciate some of those who helped him do it. Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, and our nation's premier community organizer, Barack Obama. He has organized a lot of us in the Tea Party to the Faith and Freedom Conference and Convention. He's brought us together because what he and Pelosi and Reid have threatened to do to turn our country into some cross between France and Greece, when we would prefer to return to the United States of America. But these three have motivated our team. And there are two teams in American politics. Our team, we want one thing from our central government, just to be left alone. If you go around the table of who sits at our team's table when we work together, taxpayers, they just don't want their taxes raised. Homeschoolers want their kids left alone. Businessmen and women simply wish to be allowed to run their own businesses and professional lives without the government taxing or regulating them out of existence. The Second Amendment community, I serve on the board of directors of the National Rifle Association. We just want our Second Amendment rights respected. We do not insist that every fourth grader in public school be taught books entitled Heather Has Two Hunters. Also around our table are people who the most important thing in their life is practicing their faith and raising their kids, and they want the government out of that business. And so while the other team keeps waiting for us to fall apart and fracture, we keep working together because we are not in conflict on any vote-moving issue, and every day we can get up and fight the left. The left has a challenge. Around the left's table, who sits there? The Takings Coalition, the people who think the proper role of government is taking things from some people and giving them to other people, usually them, usually money. Around the left's table, trial lawyers, the labor union bosses, the big city political machines, the two wings of the dependency movement, those people who are locked into welfare dependency and those people who make $90,000 a year managing the dependency of others, making sure none of them get jobs and become Republicans. Then we have on the left's team all the coercive utopians, the people who get government grants to push the rest of us around. These are the people who invented cars too small to put your entire family into. Light bulbs that don't light particularly. Toilets that don't flush completely. And they have this entire list of things, and Obama's churning out regulations every day. You must do this, you can't do this, you must do this, you can't do this. Their list of things we have to do or are not allowed to do is slightly longer and more tedious than Leviticus. And they want to enforce it at the point of a gun. Now, the left can work together if we're stupid enough to keep throwing money into the center of their table. When we raise taxes on those of us who work and throw them into the center of the table, our friends on the left can sit around the table and be very happy with each other. One for you, one for you, one for you. That's what the stimulus package was about. Not about some guy named Keynes, but about taking $800 billion and throwing it in the center of the table so all their friends could put their cash together. Now, our job is to stop this from happening again. Because when they did the stimulus package, remember the argument we got? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take $1 from somebody who earned it, either in debt or taxes, and hand it to someone who's politically connected, and jobs will have been created. That was the argument. That Reid, Pelosi, and Obama would stand on one side of a lake, dip 3 buckets into the lake, walk around to the other side of the lake, and in front of MSNBC cameras, pour the 3 buckets of water back in the lake and explain they were stimulating the lake to great depths. You laugh, but the plan was to do this 800 billion times, and then the lake would become very deep. Our job is to stop them from raising taxes, stop throwing money in the center of the table, so that as that stimulus money works its way down and everybody around the left's table begins to look at each other and at the dwindling pile of cash, and then they begin to look at each other a little bit more like the second to the last scene in those lifeboat movies. Now they're wondering who they're going to eat or who they're going to throw overboard. Because if we do not let them gnaw on taxpayers, they will just as cheerfully gnaw on the guy sitting next to them. Our job is to not give them more money so that every 2 and 4 years when we meet them in the next election, there are fewer of them and they're shorter. The left is not made up of friends and allies. It is made up of competing parasites. And our job is to stop feeding them. We need to say no new taxes and mean it. The Taxpayer Protection Pledge that my organization, Americans for Tax Reform, shares with all candidates simply asks a candidate running for office, say, would you promise in writing, and no insult intended, but we need 2 witnesses, that you will not raise taxes. Rather simple statement. We have 235 members of the U.S. House who've signed that pledge, 41 senators, 1,200 state legislators, and we have over 95% of all the Republicans running nationally, federally, have taken the pledge, and together the taxpayer movement and the Republican Party have branded the Republican Party as the party that will not raise your taxes. They may do other silly things, but they will not raise your taxes. And this has been important because branding is very, very important. That's why Coca-Cola spends a lot of time coming up with just the right formula, and then they make sure it's always the same, and they have quality control in advertising, so you can walk into the grocery store, pick up a bottle of Coke, throw it in the basket, take it home. You don't have to read the label. You don't have to look at it. You don't have to taste it. You don't have to ask your friends what it's like. You know what's there. You take it home. But if you get home and you are 2/3 through your bottle of Coke and you look down and there is a rat head in what is left of your Coke bottle, you do not say to yourself, you know, I'm thinking I may not finish all of this particular Coke tonight. It makes you wonder whether you'll buy Coke. Can you trust Coke? That brand has been damaged for everybody else. Republican elected officials who vote for tax increases are rat heads in a Coke bottle. Step 1, don't raise taxes. Step 2, we only learned recently. Stop spending so much money. This is where the Tea Party came in and changed American history. Yes. There have been 6 waves of immigration into the Republican Party. 1964, conservatives came in with Goldwater, turned it into a 50-state party instead of a regional party north of the Mason-Dixon line. Then in the 1970s, the religious right came in, people concerned about religious liberty, threats to Christian schools, threats to Christian radio, and energized the Republican Party, helped sweep Ronald Reagan into the presidency. In '88, Pat Robertson's campaign brought 2 million people into the Republican Party and took over and energized Republican parties all throughout the country. Then our friend Mr. Ron Paul in 2008 also brought in millions of new activists into the Republican Party. And then 2 years later in 2009, 2010, the Tea Party movement, energized by the threat to our future by this administration and the previous Congress, brought many, many people to the polls. So there have been 6 waves of movement into the party. And what's been a little bit frightening is that I understand why the left always warns us against all these new guys. Remember, don't have the religious right come in. They'll sink the party. Goldwater will sink the party. You know, the Tea Party will sink. Everything was going to be bad for us. But sometimes too many Republicans said, you know, we used to have 10 people at our town hall meeting, town party meeting, and now we have 50, and this is a problem. Who are these people? Where have they been? This is uncomfortable. Can you imagine if Walmart took that attitude? Hey, they're filling up the parking lot. They're coming in and buying stuff. We're going to have to restock everything. This is a disaster. The movement has been growing with every wave that came in, and the most recent one, the Tea Party movement, said, you know, you guys had it right about not raising taxes, but there's a second part to this. Spend less. And with the introduction of the Tea Party movement into the modern conservative movement, I think we've finally completed building a winning, successful party movement. Don't raise taxes, spend less. The Ryan Plan is the roadmap for the future. Reduce rates. Never raise taxes, and let's bring spending down. I know Obama thinks the goal is to raise taxes till we can pay for the size of government that he wants. And our answer is, we don't want the size of government you want. We want an American government that's smaller. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have a special discussion on the future of the Tea Party. Please welcome to the stage one of America's leading conservatives, Dr. Bob Record, Executive Director of the Council for National Policy.
Well, good evening. Samuel Adams said, "It does not take a majority to prevail. Rather, it takes an irate minority fueled to create fires in the minds of men and women." When I hear that quote, I think Tea Party. Ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome one of the founders of the Tea Party Patriots, married to Patty, the father of two, Mark Meckler. Would you welcome him?
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight. I was here last year. It was an incredible experience. You got to appreciate what Ralph and the Faith and Freedom Coalition are doing for America. You really got to appreciate what people like Ralph and people who've been involved in the conservative movement have done for America. You hear all this talk about the Tea Party. We hear people thanking the Tea Party, but we have to put it in historical context. There are people like Ralph, people like Bob, and people all throughout this audience who have been doing this work for 30 or 35 years. So let's give a big hand for the people on whose shoulders we stand. Now, I get asked a lot of questions about the intersection of the Tea Party movement and the social conservative movement. And I get those from journalists all the time. I get them from people in the Tea Parties all the time. So up front, just real quickly, I wanted to address that issue because I think it's an important issue. This is a critical election in our country's history. There are these two massive movements in this country. The fiscal conservative movement, now probably most primarily represented by the Tea Party, and the social conservative movement. And there's one thing that we all know for sure, whatever side of the spectrum you come from, if you're smack dab in the middle and you come from both sides of that spectrum, it's going to take all of us from that entire conservative spectrum to win the elections in 2012. Am I right about that?
That's right.
This is really important. So what is the difference? Where does the Tea Party movement intersect with the social conservative movement and vice versa? Well, obviously, the social conservative movement has been around for a lot longer. The first time I had a chance to sit down with Ralph, I was a little bit intimidated, one of the greatest grassroots activists of all time. And I wondered what he would tell us. And one of the things that he told us is he said, these are two great movements. And the social conservative movement, the Christian coalition has been on the field for quite a while now. And we've had some extraordinary success. And the most important thing that we can do is make sure that we work cooperatively, but that we do not conflate the movements. This is advice from Ralph, and this is really important advice, I think. It's one of the most important things that was ever said to me since I've been involved in this movement in my long political career of 2 years here. Unlike Ralph, I don't have all those years of wisdom, so I rely on people like him. And I think I've seen it develop this way, and it's developed this way organically and naturally. So, as I go around and I speak with folks that are social conservatives, self-identified social conservatives, I hear all the time them talk about fiscal responsibility, about a government limited by the Constitution, and about a country based on capitalism and free market principles. Are we all in agreement on those things?
Right, right.
It's also impossible to go anywhere in the Tea Party movement and not hear about a country based on Judeo-Christian values. That's the history of the country. That's the reality of this country. So when people ask me, what do the Tea Party movement and what do the social conservative movement have in common? Well, you can see we have quite a bit in common, don't we? And I would say that the vast majority of what we pursue, of our goals, of the social conservative movement goals, are perfectly parallel. We're headed towards the same goal line. Sometimes we use different methods. Sometimes we focus on different issues. And sometimes, as movements, we might even be a little bit frustrated with each other. Right? Sometimes we might feel, if we're in the social conservative side of things, that the Tea Party should be more involved with socially conservative issues and directly address those issues. And sometimes, I can tell you, there are people in the Tea Party movement who say the fiscal troubles of our nation are moral issues. It is our moral obligation not to burden our children with our own debts. The Founding Fathers understood this. And sometimes I hear people in the Tea Party movement who are not necessarily on the social conservative side of the aisle say, how come folks, for example, in the churches aren't talking about our fiscal situation? So there's frustration sometimes. but we must remember that the vast majority of the time we stand together. And we must stand together. 2012 will bring us to the precipice in this country. I've traveled all over the country. I've talked to a lot of smart people. You know, Ronald Reagan once said that they told him that there were no leaders in our time, and he said, but they just don't know where to look. I've looked all over the country, and I've met literally thousands and thousands of leaders. And I can tell you, there is not one of those leaders that doesn't understand that social conservatives and fiscal conservatives in the Tea Party must stand together if we are to return this nation to its founding principles.
Right. Mark, I'm going to ask you a couple of things you wouldn't normally just naturally say, and I know you well. You've said it well in that President Reagan said, I'd rather find somebody who agrees with me 80% of the time and work with them than to wait for somebody who agrees with me 100% of the time.
Right.
And that's exactly what you said about social and fiscal conservatives. Now, it says in our lives and our histories that defining moments are what often make us. You had a defining moment in 2008. What was it?
You know, what happened to me, what brought me into the movement and into politics, first of all, understand that I was so politically active that I voted most of the time. And really, I was interested in politics, but never involved. I did what most of us do, is I was raising kids and I was working for a living. And I started to see what happened during the Bush administration. And, you know, there was a moment during that administration that really frustrated me when I heard President Bush say, I'm abandoning free market principles to save the free market. I mean, it's a pretty stunning thing to say, isn't it? I mean, it certainly runs counter to the history of this country, and that appalled me. And then I saw President Obama get elected, and frankly, I was in denial. I couldn't believe our country would do that. And then Rick Santelli stood up in February of 2009. Yeah, he's a hero. And he said something that millions of us were already thinking. And basically what he said is, the way the government is behaving is un-American.
Right.
And that's how I felt, and that's what inspired me to come forward.
And you were a lawyer, having a practice, raising a family, building a business, hoping for a great future. What do? You
know, you step up. I didn't know what else to do. I was worried about my kids. I looked at my kids, and my kids are very intellectual. We'd have these discussions. They're only 15 and 12, but we talk politics, and we'd have these discussions, and they understood what was going on. They heard my fear, and they were scared for their future. They understood that the country was slipping away, and I just decided that I had to step up and do something. I went out and held my first Tea Party in February of 2009.
And you went back and you read the Declaration of Independence, you read the Constitution, you said somebody's got to do something, it's got to start with me, which the Tea Party is focused on. Every person can make a difference, right?
It is. It's a movement of individuals. There are millions of us, but we all lead ourselves. There is no leader of the Tea Party. We had a website for a while. It was I Am the Tea Party Leader. We had thousands and thousands of people come on and record that phrase, and that's really the hallmark of the movement. It's led by individuals.
And I know that there's been a big cost to the people who have stepped up and stepped forward and gotten counted. And I know that's happened to you. I know it's happened to Jenny Beth. I know it's happened to Amy. I know it's happened to so many folks. And as you said, I've got to make a difference, and started giving your life away, tell us about a time when I know things were right on a tipping point and you wondered, is this what I really need to be doing? Should I be doing it? Is it going to work?
Yeah, you know, I think all of us have those moments in our life, and we've been working the Tea Party movement for about a year, was traveling all over the country, and the thing I really don't like about what we do now is I'm away from my family a lot. I'm a homebody kind of a guy. I work from home. I've been privileged to spend my kids' entire lives home with them. And I was traveling a lot, and one night I came home, I flew the red eye in, I got in the morning, and I was just exhausted. I sat down at my desk to the 1,000 emails and was answering those, and in one of those emails, I saw a reminder that I had a speaking engagement that night. And I was just, you know, I was feeling for myself.
Yeah.
That's problem number one. And I was thinking, I really don't want to do this, and there's this local Tea Party, but I promised them a long time ago, and I have to show up. And to be honest, I kind of resented it, and I just felt like, what am I doing? Like you said, what am I really doing with my life? Right. Why am I doing this? I haven't seen my kids for a week. And so the time came for me to go a few hours later, and I have at that time, a new, to me, truck, a big F-350 dually. I know I don't look like a hick, but I am, I promise. So I have this big F-350 dually, and I get in my truck, and it was just a couple months new to me then. It was a used truck, but it was new to me. I get in the hill to drive down the hill, and as I'm driving down the hill, I get a call from somebody in the California legislature. Now, if you don't know, that's about the craziest place on earth. It makes this place look sane. And I'm chewing out a legislative aid because I don't like what this Republican legislator is doing. And we're having a pretty heated argument. And there's mistake number 2, right? I'm starting to speak in anger. I'm very frustrated with him. We're arguing as I drive down the hill, and I'm driving down the hill, and all of a sudden I see the fuel light come on. And so I pull off into a gas station, and I'm still arguing with him. And it's getting more and more heated, and I get out of the truck, and I fuel up, and we're still arguing, and we're not having kind words with each other. Let's put it that way. And I get back in the truck, and we're still arguing. All of a sudden, the truck starts bucking and heaving. And, I'm on the road, and it's starting to buck and heave. And I say to him, I got to go. I'm done with this conversation. And I hang up on him, and the truck is choking and smoking. And I pull over, and I can't figure out what's going on. And all of a sudden, I realize, yeah, I pulled into a gas station, and I put gas in a diesel engine. It's not bright. And so I'm pulled over on the side of the road, and I'm completely exhausted. We all been there at our wits' end. We've worked too hard, done too much, pushed too long. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I got to call these people at this Tea Party because now I'm stuck here, and I got to let them know. And I realize I don't have their phone number with me. So now I realize that I've left my family at home when I haven't seen them for a week. I was resentful that I was supposed to go speak to this Tea Party. I've been speaking in anger. And now I am paying the price. And I'm sitting on the side of the road feeling sorry for myself. And I'm also thinking about the fact that I know this isn't good. I'm no mechanic, but I know it's not good for the truck. And I call a friend of mine who's a diesel mechanic, and I live up in ranch country. I know a lot of guys like that. And I called him up, and I told him what I did. And first thing he said was, that's not bright.
Aren't friends great? They're just really wonderful.
I told him, Rob, that's not making me feel any better. He said, I don't have anything good to say to you. Honestly, you probably blew up the engine. That's what usually happens when you do this. And so I hung up, and I just sat there in the dark on the side of the highway, knowing that I was standing these people up who were expecting me and counting on me, and knowing that I was at a place where I'd been working for free for over a year. We'd spent our entire life savings and poured it into the movement because it mattered to us. And knowing that I had to call my wife and let her know, okay, I just blew up the new truck, and I don't know how we're going to fix it.
And part of your life savings affected your kids.
Well, as we got down to the end of the savings one night, Patty and I were having one of those late night talks as couples do, and we said, okay, well, I'd pretty much fired all of my clients so that we could keep doing this. And we said, well, what do we do? Do we quit? Is it time? Do we go back to work? And my wife's a stay-at-home mom, so she said, well, whatever you want to do. And we talked about it, and we talked to the kids, and we ended up digging in and spending their college money. And we did it because the discussion, and I remember my wife so distinctly saying this, and it's one of the many reasons she's one of my heroes, is she said, it's more important to have a country where it's worth having your kids go to college than having the money to send your kids to college. So I'll let her know you appreciated her, because I'm away from home again. She'll appreciate that. So I'm sitting there on the side of the road, Bob, and it's a dark moment. And in those moments, if you're a person of faith, there's only one thing to do, and so you turn to prayer, and that's what I did. But I think I did what a lot of us do also, which is I expected an answer.
Right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Please, Lord, let the truck start up again. And of course I didn't get the answer, and we ended up having the truck towed off the highway, and my wife came down and got me and the kids, and they were very supportive. And I was then going on to the next mistake, which is just beating the heck out of myself about how dumb I am for having done this. And I called my friend the mechanic and told him that we were headed home, and he told me where to have the truck towed. And I called a couple of my other friends who are mechanics. They all told me I wasn't bright and that it was, it was serious. And so the truck went to the mechanic, I went home, and the next day my phone started ringing. And it was just friends and family saying, hey, it's going to be okay, and we're praying for you. And I think that there's a tendency, I think it's just a natural tendency to take that for granted. And I know I had that tendency. Somebody says, I'll pray for you, I'm praying for your family. I appreciate that, but I don't...
But is it just words?
Yeah, I don't think I ever took it really seriously. It never had the emotional impact on me that it should. And so all these people started calling and saying that, and I was still feeling sorry for myself and having the pity party, and well, that's great, thank you very much, and on to the next call. And throughout the day this happened, and at the end of the day I got a call from the mechanic and said, okay, so I know this isn't bright, you don't have to tell me again, and what's the damage, what's it gonna be? And he said, Mark, I've been working on Power Stroke diesels for 25 years, don't feel bad, I get people who do this all the time. I told him it doesn't make me feel better to be part of a stupid club. But thanks anyway. What's the damage? And he said, in 25 years, I've never seen this happen. I have absolutely no explanation. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your truck. So, some people would call that coincidence. Some people would call it a freak event. I think I'm pretty clear what caused that event to happen. And the thing that I know about that event, Bob, is there are millions of events taking place like that all across the country that are helping us restore the country to its founding.
Right. We're out of time, but Ralph and I felt it would be very important for you to hear not just about fiscal conservatives and social conservatives and networking and cooperating, but to hear the heart of what a man or a woman does, not because there's an opportunity, but because there is a divine providential call to change the course of a nation. That's what it does. That's what it does. We're out of time. I have one last question. Mark, here's what many of us hear over and over again. Every time I turn on the TV, it's crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis. I've got a job, I've got a family, what can I do? Or, I'm a single parent. I can't even pull the pieces together. I'm not even sure I can get up tomorrow morning and take care of the kids in school, etc. What difference can I make? That's really where America is going to be won. What would you say to all of us, of all the people that you've met out there in the Tea Party movement, that we can help make a difference to those who can change the course of the nation, but feel they don't have anything to give?
I think the most important thing is to remember it's a movement of one. It's about doing something. And I talked to lots of people. I got a call from a single mom who told me she was inspired, but she didn't know what to do. She worked all the time. She had her kids. She was always exhausted. I asked her if she had a bumper sticker on her car that said Tea Party. And she said, no. I said, put that bumper sticker on your car. When you do, you're showing your neighbors, you're showing your friends, you stand in solidarity with the people who intend to retake the nation. So the thing that you have to do is whatever you can do, no matter how minimal. Don't ever think it's not enough. You are making a difference, and you will return the nation to the founding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. God bless you. God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the senior pastor of Rock Springs Church in Milner, Georgia, Pastor Benny Tate.
Thank you so very much. I'm delighted to be here. Do you ever notice speakers are always glad to be wherever they're at? I've never heard one say, I sure hate being here tonight. But I'm genuinely glad to be here. I looked down the itinerary of the speakers and I said to my associate, I feel like a penny waiting for change after the lineup. 1863, it was said that Abraham Lincoln overheard a lady saying during the height of the Civil War, I sure hope that God is on the side of the Union. And Abraham Lincoln said, ma'am, I'm not concerned about that because God is on the side of the right. I pray that we're on God's side. And I want to talk to you about God's side. What is God's side? I think, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, God's side is life. Life is important. There's the intrinsic value of every life. From the womb to the tomb, every life is important. Jeremiah, even in his mother's womb, was ordained to be a prophet. John the Baptist literally leaped in his mother's womb. That tells me he was not masses of tissue. I love what Ronald Reagan said. Ronald Reagan said, it's amazing that everybody that's for abortion has already been born. My mother was an unwed mother. The dad checked out. I met my dad when I was 30 years of age. But my mother chose to have me. I became a pastor a church in South Atlanta. We started ministry out of our church called Melba's Manor. It's a residential maternity home for unwed mothers. And scores of babies are being born rather than being aborted because God's got a plan for every life. God is for life. But God's not only for life, but God is for the sanctity of marriage. The sanctity of marriage. The Bible is very clear that therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Ladies and gentlemen, I could care less what your political affiliation is. God has defined marriage, and marriage is to be between one man and one woman. We've got a definition of what marriage ought to be. If we get on God's side, we're on the side of life. If we get on God's side, we're on the side of marriage. But if we get on God's side, we're on the side of responsibility of work. Responsibility of work. Winston Churchill said the price of greatness is responsibility. The Bible says in Genesis 2:15, and the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it. The Bible says in 2 Thessalonians 3:10 that if any would not work, neither should they eat. Ladies and gentlemen, that ought to be put in every welfare office in America, that if any would not work, neither shall he eat. There was a redhead by the name of Patrick Henry who stepped forward and said, give me liberty or give me death. But we've created a culture that simply says, give me, give me, give me. But Gerald Ford said it best. Any government that's big enough to give you everything you want is also big enough to take away everything that you've got. And Thomas Jefferson said the government that governs best is the government that governs least. Now, our government spends millions of dollars. I was doing some research and I found out that our government spends millions of dollars trying to find out the answers to some things. Why people cheat and lie on tennis courts. The mating habits of Japanese quails. Do sheepdogs really protect sheep? I say with affirmation, government is not the answer. Government is the problem. Government's not a producer. Government is a taxer, taker, and spender. See, we've misunderstood the Constitution. The Constitution says it's the government's responsibility to promote the general welfare and provide the common defense. It's not the government's responsibility to provide the general welfare and promote the common defense. People, the Bible is very clear. God's given us two ends. They have a common link. With one end we sit, with the other end we think. Success in life depends on which end we use. Heads we win, tails we lose. Setting still and wishing makes no man great. The good Lord sends the fishing, but we got to dig the bait. We got to go to work. I love the story about a little boy and three bullies jumped on him. These big boys jumped on this little boy and he looked the biggest bully right in the eye. drew a line in the sand, and he said, I dare you to step across that line. That big boy looked him in the eye. He stepped across the line. He said, I'm on the other side now. What are you going to do about it? He said, well, I was just thinking, we're both on the same side now. We need to get on God's side. We're talking about returning to faith. We're talking about returning to family. We're talking about returning to freedom. We go back to the Declaration of Independence. Our forefathers gave us something to shoot for. They gave us something to aspire to be. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You say, Pastor, that's wonderful. It is. But I want to say to you, it doesn't end there. If you read on, it says, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. It is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. God is for life. God is for the sanctity of marriage. God is for the responsibility of work. And I say to you as a group of people, we've got some altering and we've got some abolishing to do. And I end with a quote from Ronald Reagan, and I say this concerning 2012. Delegation, if we can't make them see the light, let's make them feel the heat. God bless you.
If tomorrow all the things were
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairman of Renewing America and the pastor of Skyline Church in San Diego, California, Dr. Jim Garlow.
I thank my lucky stars to be living here today.
A tragedy occurred in our community last year. An unbelievable tragedy. There was a series of break-ins, lots of break-ins. Numbers of people had their homes broken into. An awful lot was stolen. In a short span of time, quite frankly, during the course of last year, particularly towards the end of last year. Now, you know, if you, in your community, if you go to a particular website, you can find listed, for example, the sexual predators in your community that live in a reasonable distance from your house. It's a pretty intimidating thing to take a look at. But you can also find out, we found out, to discover who were the people that were breaking into our homes. Between 280 and 300 of them were breaking into our homes and stealing so much. You can do it in your community as well. You just simply Google the Congress. Somewhere between 280 to 300 congressmen broke into our homes in our community called America and literally stole from us, from our children, and from our grandchildren. Now, why would otherwise sane and rational people do such a thing, assuming they are in fact sane and rational? Why would they in fact do that? I'm a pastor. I see through the lens of a pastor. And so my answer is going to sound very pastoral. They lack biblical truth. Let me pose a question for you. How many of the congressmen that are destroying, and I'm not speaking obviously about the godly congressmen who stood here and see the problem and are trying to correct it, but we need a lot more of them like that who care about biblical truth. How many of those who voted that way, how many of them, of our congressmen today, are in a church or in a parish or in some religion faith where they hear actually ongoing, true, authentic biblical teaching on these issues? How many? Would it be 10%, 20%, 5%? I don't know. Let's arbitrarily just pick the number 20%. I think that's too high. But let's imagine, let's wish there were 20% attending where they were actually hearing the truth. Now let me pose this question. Of those, how many of them would hear a sermon on the biblical underpinnings as it relates to the economic issues of civil governance? And then we wonder why they do the things they do. Where are they hearing from truth on this issue? Now, I'm fortunate my congressman goes to my church, so he does hear sermons on this topic. Probably more than he might want. I have a wonderful congressman, proud of him. Let me pose the question broader. How many people in our churches, the voting electorate, are hearing sermons where there's actual application from the Scripture to community life? And we wonder what's going wrong. We're phrasing the question in the wrong way. It is not right versus left. It is right versus wrong. And we must call it for what it is. It is foundationally wrong to rip a baby apart in the womb. I think even using the term abortion mitigates against the reality and the horrors of that act. I have gone to people who are running for office and said, what's your position on abortion? And they tell me in their sometimes very weak language. And then I say, well, let me ask you a question. Have you ever observed what you're speaking about? Have you ever watched an abortion? Well, no. I said, well, I'm going to provide it for you. Sit right here. We got the computer. We're going to punch it right now. You can watch what you say you're for. I want you to see it firsthand. We talk of destruction of marriage as if it's something glib, like it's equal, a traditional marriage versus gay marriage, like they're moral equivalents. They are not. Our president gave a speech a few days ago in which he said, the tragedy of 9/11 was that it robbed so many children of having a mommy or a daddy. Well, you know what, Mr. President? Your failure to defend marriage and to redefine marriage means that everybody who's under that redefined marriage will lack either a mommy or a daddy. And that is morally wrong. It is morally wrong for a group of congressmen to rob our children of their futures. Thou shalt not steal is crystal clear. I'm weary of hearing of a gap between social conservatives and fiscal conservatives. I understand biblical truth and biblical reality. These issues at their core are spiritual issues. Now, what is it going to take for us to see this nation actually turn? Imagine with me for a moment. I recognize you're political activists. I recognize I'm not in church. I recognize most of you are not pastors, if any of you. But just dream with me for a moment. Dream with me for a moment. What would happen if 10% of America's pastors would stand up and boldly declare the truth on these issues? What would happen in our nation? We have 350,000 churches. Many pastors are bold. You just heard a very bold one, Benny Tate, who was here a moment ago. We need thousands more like him. We need 100,000 like him. Why are they silent? Why are some silent? Frank Wright of the National Religion Organization said recently in a conference that many pastors are self-censoring. Not only are people leaning on them, don't talk about politics when it's really a biblical issue. What happens when Caesar demands that which is God's? That's what's happened here. These aren't merely political issues, like the reporter said to me from a major station here in town yesterday. Why would you dare speak out on political issues? I'm speaking out, sir, on biblical issues that have political ramifications. And I should when babies are being killed in the womb. That being the case, why would pastors self-censor so much? Why would some be chilled? Some would hold back and wouldn't declare boldly what the Scripture says about community life. It's going to take that for us to win it. It's going to take that for us to win it. There was a 1954 law that was passed by Lyndon Baines Johnson called the Johnson Amendment, tucked into the IRS code. And the implications of that, it's never been contested constitutionally, but it has silenced so many pastors across America. I'm thankful for the Alliance Defense Fund, a group of Christian attorneys across America that are challenging pastors on October the 2nd, to rise up, preach bold, biblically founded sermons, record them, send them to the IRS. It'll be the 4th year they've challenged the IRS on this particular issue. Let me be candid with you. I want to talk just as a pastor to you, as people I care about. I cannot tell you the number of times where I've spoken at a place and people come up to me, oh, would you please talk to my pastor? Would you please talk to my pastor? I want him to speak out with the boldness that you've just demonstrated. I say, I'm sorry, I won't. I won't. Your pastor is doing that for a reason. He won't, and I cannot change his mind. I'm sorry. There's an axiom among cancer patients that goes like this. If your doctor robs you of hope, get a new doctor. I don't know how a nice way to say this, but if your pastor will not stand on biblical truth, on tearing up a baby in the womb, if he will not stand for the truth that marriage is one man, one woman, if he will not call out those who would rob us in our state capitals or our U.S. Capitol on the issue of robbing and stealing from us and stealing our futures economically and turning our grandchildren much closer to slavery than they are free people. If we don't have people that will stand that way, if you don't have people that stand that way, find a new church. Go to those who will. Around you in your community are pastors. There are courageous priests in your parish. Stand with them during this time. I was receiving an award. I shouldn't have been getting the award because every pastor should speak out on the truth of God's word on these issues, but I was receiving an award like something unique to do that. And a person stopped me just before I was getting the award. He was at an event that was honoring me for this, speaking out on this issue, and he actually said to me, oh, I got something so I'm excited to tell you. I said, what's that? He says, my pastor finally let me put up a table in the back to try to make people aware of it. He was reporting to me that as if it was a victory. My heart broke for him. He's saying to me, my pastor finally let me do this. I wanted to say, sir, your pastor should be leading you in this. On that night that Paul Revere was writing, that famous night, he was going for one place. He was going to the home of Jonas Clark. Jonas Clark is a pastor. He was trying to get to Jonas Clark. You know why? Because Jonas Clark was a threat to those that were against truth. Jonas Clark is a pastor, like many pastors all up and down the colonies, was a threat to those who stood for freedom. He knew if he could silence the pastors that became the black robe regimen that you know so much about, pastors at the end of their sermons would take off their black robes, and there they would have the attire of military, and there they'd have a musket. Join me, and let's go fight this. Unless we have a black robe regiment, a Jonas Clark kind of pastorate, we will not win this. We'll just be battling it every 2 years until we have a change in the hearts of people to see the truth about God's Word. David Barton and I did a tour. We took people on a tour called the Next Great Awakening Tour. It was in Boston, and New York, and Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., and Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, all the sites of the First and Second Great Awakening, the Revolutionary War sites, etc. And the most important place we stopped was the home of Jonas Clark, the pastor who had the courage. Let me close with a story that's so tender and so delicate. I debated right up to the moment I'm about to share it, whether I should share it with you. It is so tender to me personally, and some of you may be uncomfortable by the level of how deeply personal it actually is. My wife has been in a battle with cancer for 4 years. It's been a rugged 4 years. We just found out that May the 11th, the cancer has returned for the 4th time in 4 years, a very aggressive form of cancer. Moved into the liver and now into the lymph nodes. And she's now in a clinical phase trial right now in MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. We fly there from San Diego every week, trying to see what we can do to stop this very aggressive primary peritoneal carcinoma. It was April of a year ago when we started the 3rd round with the battle of cancer. I received a phone call from the oncologist. It shocked me. He said the cancer has come back. It was stunning. I sat there. I took the phone call alone because my wife was away at the time. And I asked the question that no cancer patient or primary caregiver should ever ask. I violated all the standard rules. And I said, doctor, barring a miracle, which we're still counting on, by the way, barring a miracle, how long do we have? He answered the question. It was so jolting to me. My body actually shook in that moment. A few days later, I felt the strongest of impressions. In my language, I would say, I believe it was the Holy Spirit speaking to me. And the analogy was like this. You're fighting for the life of your nation. You're fighting for the life of your wife, and it seems short, but you're also fighting for the life of your nation. When you go into a battle to try to keep somebody alive in this condition, as many of you know, because you've been through those battles with loved ones, I'm sure, there's a tremendous cost in the radiation, and the chemo, and the trips across America, and all the alternatives that you try, and tremendous cost on the family. My younger 2 children haven't known their mother being healthy since the 9th grade. My 5 grandsons haven't known her being healthy most of their lives. There's a tremendous cost that begins to extract in the process of time. But you know it's worth it. It's worth it. Your land has cancer. It's advanced. It's seriously advanced. You know that. That's why you're here. That's why you went through all the effort. And in order for us to save our land, we're going to have to go through some tough things. There's going to have to be enormous sacrifices. It's going to be as bad as chemo and radiation is on the human body. There's going to be sacrifices economically beyond what most of us want to pay. We're going to have to sacrifice at the level of our founding fathers to see this nation turn. Because at the end of 2012, I want to be able to say to the world, my wife is still alive, and so is my country. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from the Minnesota Faith and Freedom Coalition, Carol Schulstead.
No box and no cheaters. So here's paper. Hey, it's really an honor to introduce a favorite son of the great state of Minnesota, Governor Tim Pawlenty. There is a saying that the best predictor of future performance in life is past performance. And Tim Pawlenty's past performance as governor of Minnesota gives great hope for all Americans. As the chief executive of Minnesota, he was unabashedly pro-life and pro-family while using conservative leadership to cut spending and balance the state budget. A great governor from humble beginnings, the son of a truck driver and the first to graduate from college, Tim understands the limitless possibilities for our great nation. Please join me and give Tim a warm faith and freedom welcome to a friend of the conservative movement, Governor Tim Pawlenty.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that a great deal. Thank you. Or as President Obama would say, you're welcome. The Bible teaches us that the truth will set us free, and there are many truths that I know that you've heard here today. And as we wind down this great day in the Faith and Freedom Coalition, this important gathering, I'd like to share a few additional truths that are important for the future direction of our country. We live in the greatest nation in the history of the world. There are no people anywhere at any time that have experienced more success and more prosperity than those of us fortunate enough to live in the United States of America in these modern times. But as you know, our country faces grave challenges, and our beloved United States of America is in big trouble. And so we have to make sure that we see the challenges clearly and that we call them out clearly and we provide the solutions clearly. And unfortunately, we have a president whose policies have failed, and he won't tell the people of the United States of America the truth about what it's really going to take to fix these problems. If we're going to restore America's promise, we need to have a president that keeps his or her promises to America, and that's not Barack Obama. Now, he started out by running, he made a number of big promises to the country. You'll remember he stood in Iowa and said, you know, we do need to fix the broken health care system. But back then, he opposed the individual mandate. He said he would do health care reform with Republicans. He would focus on cost containment. Do you remember those statements? Did he keep his word to America? Barack Obama ran and got elected president within the first months of his presidency after he knew about the economic challenges our nation was facing. He said he would cut the deficit in half during his first term as president. Did he keep his promise to America? President Obama, as a senator, said, don't raise the debt ceiling cap. That would be an example of failed leadership. Now he's become the champion of raising the debt ceiling. The last thing we need to do as a country is to give Barack Obama more money to waste in Washington, D.C. But beyond what his promises are that have been broken, we've got other challenges that we're going to have to clean up and the mess we're going to have to fix. This is a nation that faces $4 a gallon gasoline. We've got crushing levels of unemployment that's hurting our fellow citizens and families all across this country. We've got a federal government that is out of control, and we have a president who offers us more fluffy rhetoric. President Obama's fluffy rhetoric doesn't fill our gas tanks with gas, and it doesn't pay our mortgages, and it doesn't pay for our children's needs and clothes and things that they might need, and it doesn't pay the mortgage. And I think you could join me, can't you, in tell President Obama, we've had enough of your broken promises. We've had enough of your fluffy rhetoric. Lead the country or get out of the way. America is drowning in debt. And the weight of that is crushing. We're spending as a federal government, they're spending as a federal government $40,000 a second in money they don't have. In the hour or so that you'll be gathered here between 9 and 10, the United States of America will go $144 million more into debt in just this 1 hour. 40 cents out of every dollar that the federal government spends is money they don't have. We're not just running out of money, we're running out of time. And there's people who say, you know, Tim, if you tell the truth as you're running for president, you may lose an election. I'm afraid that if we don't tell the truth, we're going to lose our country. I'm running for president because I love the United States of America, and with my leadership and experience, we can get it back to a better place, but we're going to have to identify the real challenges and offer real solutions. We're together going to have the courage to tell each other and the American people the truth. And so when I started my campaign, I went to the all-important state of Iowa and said, even for people in Iowa, there's some real truths we're going to have to tell. That means we're going to have to phase out the ethanol subsidies, and I said that on the announcement speech in Iowa. I then went down to Florida and talked to seniors and others about what it's really going to take to fix Social Security and the other entitlement programs in this country. And then I went to Wall Street and told them to get their snout out of the trough because they're some of the worst offenders when it comes to bailouts and carve-outs and special deals. And then we came to Washington, D.C. and told the federal employees, you can't get paid more and better than the people who are paying the bill, the taxpayers, so your pay and benefits are going to be frozen and reformed. And if we had time tonight to go around this room and hear each of your American stories, I think we'd hear incredible stories about faith and family. I think we'd hear stories about the value of hard work. I think we hear inspiring stories about people starting things and having a dream and building and creating. I think we'd hear stories about people providing jobs and building businesses and working with others to make the private economy going forward. I think we'd hear inspiring stories about challenges that you've had in your life, maybe in finance or health, or other loved ones or family members have struggled and maybe them or you have needed a little picking up and pat on the back of encouragement. I think we'd hear incredible stories about what inspires you about our country and individual responsibility and industriousness and hard work and faith and family. But what we wouldn't hear is people standing up and saying how the bureaucracy and the government transformed your heart and transformed your life. And so we need to make sure that we keep first things first and make sure that our future is based on what we know works. The way forward may not be easy, but it's not complex. We know the values and principles that this country was founded on. We can look back at the chapters of success of this nation and harvest those values and principles, and what we need to do is bring them forward to the opportunities and challenges of our time. And it starts with basic common sense principles, and let me just go through a few of them with you. The first one is this. Let's always remember where this starts. We need to be a nation that turns toward God, not away from God. And this isn't the rhetoric of a modern-day politician. This was the founding perspective of our founders. They put it in the founding documents. And as an example of that, 49 of the 50 states have language in their state constitutions like Minnesota does. In the very first sentence, in the very first paragraph of our Constitution in Minnesota, it says this: we, the people of Minnesota, grateful to God for our civil and religious liberties. It doesn't say grateful to our city council member, or grateful to our local regulator, or grateful to our member of Congress. These privileges and rights are endowed to us by our Creator. They come from the Creator. They're guaranteed by the Constitution. So let's remember where this begins. The second principle I want to share with you that's very important is if we're going to provide a quality of life to our citizens, we need to remember this point. It's really hard to have a quality of life unless you have a life. And so we need to stand as a conservative movement for protection and respect for life. It's foundational to our country and everything else. The third is traditional marriage matters. And we need to tell each other and the country that we need to keep traditional marriage elevated on a platform. All domestic relationships are not the same as traditional marriage. It needs to be protected. And a mom and a dad and parents matter in a child's life for obvious reasons. And so it is a cornerstone of our nation. It's a cornerstone of our social fabric to define marriage as between a man and a woman. I'm glad to be the co-author of the Defense of Marriage Act in Minnesota. The next is this. We can't be a successful and continue to be a great nation unless we're secure. People won't dream or take risks or deploy capital or invent or do things unless they feel secure. And as a nation, we need to remember that the first and most important responsibility of our federal government is to keep this nation safe and secure and our people secure. And let's remember that the individuals and the mindset that perpetuated the horrible acts of September 11th, 2001, and killed 3,000 or so of our fellow citizens, that mindset still exists. And if they could have killed not 3,000, but 30,000 or 300,000 or 3 million, they would have. And as soon as they get the capability, they'll try. And we need to make sure we stand strong and vigilant and diligent to make sure those threats are identified, called by name, and defeated before they operationalize against the United States of America. Radical Islam, not all of Islam, but radical Islam believes it's okay to kill and to murder in the name of their religion. It's not. We need to make sure we call this by name and make sure we stand up to it, not as being afraid of it as a matter of political correctness. It is not okay, and we need to say that. And one other thing. We need a president of the United States who stands shoulder to shoulder with our great friend Israel and make sure there is no daylight between the United States and Israel. Now, the next ones, I know it's been a long day. You've been here a long time, and maybe things are wearing on for you, and there's just a couple more speakers. And so I'm going to say this slowly. I know we have some Democrat trackers in the back, so I'm going to say it slowly so even they can follow along with this. Are you ready? This one's important. It's very complex, very difficult. We can't spend more than we take in. The federal government takes in about $2.2 trillion in revenues each year, and they're spending $3.7 trillion. You can't do that as a family, you can't do it as a business, and we can't let the government do it anymore. Just because we followed Greece into democracy does not mean we're going to follow them into bankruptcy. Two other quick things. If we're going to provide a quality of life to our fellow citizens, they got to have jobs. And we need to do those things that are going to make it more likely that jobs are going to grow in this country, not less likely. And in the interest of time, I won't go through it all, but I talk to hundreds and hundreds of job providers and all across this country every day, and they all say the same thing. Get the government off my back. So those burdens as measured by taxes and regulation and permitting and energy costs and litigation costs and the time and expense that goes with government saying, It's going to be slow, more expensive, more difficult. It's discouraging. We want to encourage, not discourage our job providers. And when government pushes into our lives and says we're going to take over one more space that was for families, that was reserved for neighborhoods or communities or churches or places of worship or entrepreneurs or private markets, they not only grow their own budget, they not only grow their footprint, but they do something else. They discourage the American spirit. And the brilliance of this country is not in our government, it's in our people. And that spirit needs to rise again. And we, the American people, will take back this country. I want to close and just tell you, the best sermons aren't preached, they're lived. So all the candidates are going to come out here in places like this and tell you, hey, I'm for cutting taxes, I'm for reducing spending, I'm for promoting judges who are strict constructionists, I'm for pro-life, and I'm for traditional marriage, and I'm for being tough on terrorism, and I'm for school choice, and I'm for market-based health care reform, and on down the list. You're going to say, boy, that sounds pretty similar. But I hope you'll also ask the question, who's actually done it? We not just talked about it, who's actually done it? And in the land of Al Franken, we've moved the needle on all of it. I want to just tell you in one last thought. There's countries been at this intersection before. In the late 1970s, the economy was in big trouble. We were facing foreign security threats, and it looked like the future was not going to be as bright as the past. And a new president about to be sworn in walked out of the United States Capitol. It was an overcast day in the early year of 1981. His name was Ronald Wilson Reagan. And as he took to the podium to take the oath of office, he remembered later in his memoirs that the clouds had parted for a brief moment, and he felt a ray of warmth hit the podium in the very moment that he was being sworn in as President of the United States. He turned to the side of the podium, and he put his hand on his mother's Bible, Nell's Bible. And on his hand, he laid his hand on the verse 2 Chronicles 7:14, which, as you know, says this: if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sins, and heal their land. That passage doesn't say, if those people over there do something. It says, if my people. The responsibility first comes to us. And so this is the United States of America, and the way forward will not be easy, but we all have a duty and responsibility to restore this wonderful land, this God-privileged, God-blessed country. And we need to make sure that while it may not be easy, that we're up for the fight. And so if security were easy, everybody around the world would be secure. And if prosperity, everybody around the world would be prosperous if it were easy. And if freedom were easy, everybody around the world would be free. But they're not. But Americans are, because our founding fathers had the courage and the wisdom to lay down these principles and values in the roadmap that is our country's founding documents. And they envisioned this. Ronald Reagan personified it. Lincoln stood courageously to defend it. And now the call comes to each of us. Are you? I am, and I'm ready for this fight. Barack Obama promised great change in 2008, and he did change the country. But this time in 2012, we will change the country, and it will be for the better. Thanks for being here. Let's go take back America and win this election. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage one of the leaders against liberal judicial actors of liberty, the Chief Counsel for the American Center of Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow.
It's great to be here. Change we can believe in, right? Let me tell you a little bit about the change that I have to deal with every day under this administration. Let me start with the abortion issue. By the way, first thing we need to say, next time someone calls our radio broadcast and says, hey, the president's just naive. He's uninformed. Let me tell you something. The policies I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes, this is not naive. This is intentional. It's intentional when you say that under your health care plan, mandated now by the federal government, soon to be struck down by the Supreme Court of the United States, to say that abortion coverage was not mandatory is ridiculous. Read your 2,400 pages of legislation, and there it is. That's not naive. That's intentional. This is also intentional. The state of Indiana passes a law, and they say, you know what? We're not going to fund Planned Parenthood as part of our program. The American Civil Liberty Union files suit. Well, what a shock. But Health and Human Services from the Obama administration says they're right, that the ACLU is right. So our taxpayer dollars, of which the government says they don't have enough of our money as it is, right? They have enough money, though, to mandate abortion coverage. This tells you this is not change, again, that I believe in. Let me focus for a moment on the situation in the Middle East. We have an office at the American Center for Law and Justice in Jerusalem. I'm currently involved in a case at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, defending Israel's right of sovereignty, really all of our rights of sovereignty for self-defense. The plaintiff in the case is the Palestinian Authority. You remember them. That's the group the President of the United States talked about when the Prime Minister of Israel was in his office and said, I know it's going to be difficult. I know it's going to be tough. But you need to sit down and negotiate with the group that is calling for not only the destruction of Israel, but destruction of Jews everywhere. That is in the Hamas charter. And the president says difficult and problematic? No, ridiculous and absurd. You know, in the United States of America, you donate money to Hamas, we put you in jail. Then why are we sending now $500 million a year, $500 million a year to a Palestinian Authority now in partnership with Hamas to train their security forces to use against our so-called, I guess not any longer, although I think they still should be, greatest ally, not just in the region, but frankly in the world, and that is Israel. Why are we doing that? Here's why. The president really believes it. You know, it's not naive when you say, I want to see a return to the pre-67, by the way, boundaries. That means a divided Jerusalem. That means when you visit Israel and want to go to the holy sites, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I can go on and on and on, the Western Wall, you're not going to go unless Hamas approves it. Now, would we, as Benjamin Netanyahu say, would we negotiate with Al-Qaeda? No. The president, rightfully I might say, killed the leader of Al-Qaeda. But we're expecting the Israelis to cut their territory down to an 9 mile width at its narrow, 9 miles. Do you know how long it takes to get a rocket? I've been there when those rockets come in. To go 8 or 9 miles? Seconds. But we're expecting them to negotiate. And now we've got the Palestinian Authority saying if the Israelis don't negotiate, although they are refusing to recognize Israel's right to even exist as a Jewish state, and I want to underscore something, as a Jewish state. Because to say Israel has the right to exist, that's one thing. To say it has the right to exist as a Jewish state is quite different. I'm glad, by the way, that Congress recognized that. I'm also telling you that I expect a rebuke aimed at the President of the United States coming out of the United States Senate with bipartisan support saying no return to the 67 borders, no negotiations with Hamas, and no divided Jerusalem. You know, the president called Israel 3 times in that speech the occupying force. You know who uses that language? The terrorists. They also call Israel the Zionist regime. Is that what we're going to hear out of the White House next? The Zionist regime? Does everybody forget, does the White House forget the history of the rebirth of the state of Israel? By the way, you know when people say God's not in the land granting business? I don't actually, I think he is in the land granting business, and was very clear. There's no doubt on who owns that land. But the idea that we are put pressure on our ally to circumvent their own national security and sovereignty is not, again, naive. It is, as I said, absurd. Now, we're funding abortion through this health care plan, right? We fund abortion. President denies it. We go after Indiana. President denies it. Let me tell you something. The president says, Indiana, you have to allow federal funding and your taxpayer funding through Medicaid reimbursements to go to Planned Parenthood. Have to. Mandatory. Now, I don't want to get on judicial nominations too long because I only have a certain amount of time to speak, but as you know, I do a lot of work at the Supreme Court of the United States. And I am grateful for a lot of things from President Bush, but let me give you two that I'm really grateful for. Roberts and Alito. The next president of the United States, I want you to think about this. The next president of the United States probably selects one or maybe two more Supreme Court justices. Let me tell you what that means, folks. That's the Supreme Court for the rest of my life. Now, I like Roberts and Alito. I always like to get all 9, and a lot of times we do. But let's take a look at that health care case for a moment. I've got it in the district court right now, up now in the Court of Appeals. It's going to go to the Supreme Court of the United States. You know, I argued a portion of the campaign finance law back in 2004. We won that one unanimously on my provision. The rest of the law they held constitutional. My provision we got struck, which was prohibiting youth from engaging in the political process. We won that unanimously. I always like to get all 9. But you certainly, I was never a great math student, but I could count to 5. And if you don't get to 5, you lose. That health care case comes up. We have to have 5 votes. And I want the next president of the United States to be one of our guys. Or gals. I want our team making that selection. Because when people criticize the former president, President Bush, I always remind them, Alito, Roberts, like a mantra almost. Because when you do what I do for a living, let me tell you something. It's good to have, and that's not our only allies up there, by the way. But the fact of the matter is, Supreme Court nominees make a difference. And I don't want to live in a country that could go the other way or really redesign the America we know. Why are we apologizing for the exceptionalism of a country that my grandfather fled to, leaving Russia as an immigrant through Ellis Island? And his grandson gets to argue cases before the Supreme Court of the United States or the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Only in America. We don't need to apologize. We don't need to apologize for being Americans. But we also don't need to sue the state of Arizona for protecting its citizens from a border war. Now look, I keep asking, where is all this money coming from to fund Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, to fund Planned Parenthood? You know, look what Planned Parenthood's done. If it was any other organization in the country, they'd all be indicted. Planned Parenthood, I guess they get an exemption, like most of the unions are now getting, by the way, from the health care plan. That's part of the deal. On the immigration issue, Arizona's trying to defend its citizens. Let me tell you something. I am in favor of legal immigration. My goodness, I would not be standing here today. But my grandfather came through Ellis Island. He waited in line. He learned to speak English, which, by the way, was the language spoke in my grandfather's house. He learned it. He wasn't speaking Russian in those days. He understood what leaving Russia meant. Freedom. That Statue of Liberty I've got in my office. We have great offices in Washington, D.C., right next to the Supreme Court. My wife and boys gave me a present a couple years ago. It's a model of Ellis Island. So do I love immigration? Yes, legal immigration. That's why we are the great country we are. But my goodness, let the state of Arizona defend its citizens from a border war. All right. We need change. We need change we can really believe in. That's going to start with regaining the Senate and getting the right president of the United States. Together we can make that difference. We can undo Obamacare, let our states defend their citizens, protect the unborn, be faithful to the Constitution, protect our ally in the Middle East, and not be embarrassed to say, we are Americans, we're proud of our heritage, and we're going to stand for liberty and freedom and the Constitution and the rule of law. So help us, God. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the former First Lady of the great state of Massachusetts, Mrs. Ann Romney.
Wow, thank you. Oh, it's been a busy couple of days for Mitt and I. As you know, we have done something. I think we put a warning shot across the bow of the Obama administration because we're coming to get him. Many of you know Mitt and I have known each other for a very long time. We actually knew each other when we were children. Started dating when we were in high school, have been married for 42 years. We have 5 children, 5 daughters-in-law, and 16 grandchildren. I was the one that encouraged Mitt recently to think about getting back in this race. Now, I will tell you I love my children, but any of you that have grandchildren, I love my grandchildren a lot more. And I am concerned about this country and about the direction it's going and about the future for my grandchildren, which is why Mitt and I have decided to get in this race and to bring America back to where it needs to be. I have known Mitt, as you might know, through thick and thin. I've had a few challenges of my own. When I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, he was the man that stood by me and helped me pull me through that and gave me the strength to overcome that illness. He was also by my side when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that was 2 years ago. And he stood by me through thick and thin through that. We've been through some good times and some bad times. But the one person I know that everyone calls on when there's a crisis, it's Mitt Romney. He is the guy that knows how to fix things and how to put things back on track and how to turn things around. And if ever there was a need in this country to have a turnaround, it's right now. So Mitt, it's up to you, sweetie.
Group. Wow. Exciting. Thank you. That is a remarkable woman. I'll tell you right there. She is my hero and a champion. I'm honored to be with you. We're united tonight in a lot of things. We're united in the love we have for this great country. We're united in our belief in the sanctity of human life. We're united in our belief in the importance and significance of marriage between one man and one woman. We're united in our belief in America. And tonight as we gather, we're also united in our concern for America because our country is in peril. About 3 years ago, America did something which is the kind of thing Americans do from time to time. We elected someone new to be president. We didn't know much about him, didn't have much of a track record, but he was extraordinarily gifted as a speaker. His soaring rhetoric and promises of change and hope convinced the American people to give him a try. And now, a third year into his 4-year term, we have more than rhetoric to go by. We have his record. Barack Obama has failed the American people. When he took office, his #1 job, in addition to caring for our troops overseas, was to get the American economy to turn around. And so he came to the American people and said, look, I want to borrow $787 billion. And if you let me borrow that kind of money from China and others, I'll be able to hold unemployment below 8%. It hasn't been below 8% since. And today it ticked up, as you know, to 9.1%. And so now, 3 years later, we have high unemployment. We have 20 million Americans out of work or stopped looking for work or in part-time jobs where they wish they could get full-time jobs. 20 million Americans. We still have, 3 years later, home foreclosures at record levels. 3 years later, we have declining home prices. 3 years later, we have debt piling on debt. We have as much debt now at the federal government level, almost as the size of our total economy. This presidency has been a failure. And what does he have to say about this? He says, I'm just getting started. No, Mr. President, you've had your turn. It's now our turn. We're the ones that are just getting started. And did you hear what he said today about the 9.1% unemployed Americans? He said that's just a bump in the road. No, Mr. President, that's not a bump. That's Americans. People unemployed are not just statistics or bumps. If you have this number of people unemployed, you have college kids, for instance, that can't go to the next semester, some who can't even go to college. You have people, young marrieds, who want to start a household that can't afford to do so. You have marriages that sometimes break under the strain of unemployment. You have people who are 55 years old, in the prime of their life, out of work, wondering if they'll ever get another job. This is not just a crisis. This is a moral crisis that we face in this country. And with this crisis going on, the president is in the Midwest today, taking a victory lap about how successful he's been in dealing in the automobile industry. And so he's taking a victory lap at the very time we have more people announced today that are out of work. It's an extraordinary thing. I don't think it's possible to solve a crisis if you can't see a crisis. And this president does not see a crisis, and we do. I also think it's a moral tragedy for us to pile up more and more debt that we know we can't possibly pay off during our lifetimes, and pushing that onto the next generation. I think it's totally inexcusable. I want to make sure that we as a generation, and generations in this room, pass along a torch to the next generation rather than passing on a bill for our excesses. And we're going to do that. Now, I sometimes wonder how it is that the president has been so wrong in his guidance of the economy and the nation. And I'm reminded of what Ronald Reagan said. He said, it's not that liberals are ignorant, it's just that what they know is wrong. And he's proven that, hasn't he? But there's something more than that. I think whether it's the inspiration that came from the faculty lounges he's been in, or whether it's the inspiration that comes from watching the policies of the Europeans, but much of what he's done is similar to the policies that you've seen come out of Europe. So with our economy in trouble, he did what they did. He spent more money and borrowed more money. With people out of work, he did what the Europeans did. He pushed unions and saluted the union bosses. With health care having difficulties, he said, let's have the federal government take it over, just like the Europeans did. With energy challenges, he did the same thing they did. He pursued cap and trade. He thought higher prices would help us out. Look, the European solutions don't work for Europe. They're certainly not going to work for America. The right answer for America is to believe in the principles that made America, America. For instance, I believe in American free enterprise, American opportunity, American freedom and liberty. I tell you briefly a story of my dad. My dad grew up poor. His dad went broke more than once. My dad learned to be a lath and plaster carpenter. He could take a handful of nails, put them in his mouth, spit them out pointy side forward, and then nail them one by one. And then when he was, of course, he couldn't get the time or the money to put together to get a college degree, didn't graduate from college. But then when he got married to my mom, they went across the country. He filled the back of the trunk with aluminum paint, and he sold paint along the way to pay for gas and hotels. Now, my dad believed in America. He believed in the opportunity that America represented. And so he was able to grow up and ultimately become the chief executive officer of one of America's leading car companies. And he also became the governor of a state where he once sold aluminum paint. This is a nation where the circumstance of your birth is no barrier to your achievement. If you dream, this is a great land. I believe in free enterprise and capitalism, by the way. In this campaign, we're going to have somebody who can stand up for those economic principles that help us lead the world economically. And I can do that because I've lived those principles. I believe in the Constitution and in the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, by the way, which limits the power of the federal government and preserves powers of the states. If I'm lucky enough to be president, I'm going to go through the federal government and take dozens of programs that are in the federal government and return them to the states and to the private sector where they belong. And the mother of all power grabs, I will also return. The mother of all federal power grabs is, of course, Obamacare. We're going to get rid of that. I believe in the principle of limited government. Government's too big. Do you realize how much government at the federal, state, and local level now accounts for, in our economy? About 40% of the total U.S. economy is accounted for by government. The federal share of that is about 25% of the total economy, of the GDP. In my view, what I would do if I'm President of the United States is to say we're going to limit federal spending to 20%, not 25% or 30%, which is where it's headed, but to 20% of the GDP. And we're not going to raise taxes, and we are going to finally balance our budget and keep America within its means. I believe in America. I believe in freedom and opportunity. I believe in free enterprise and capitalism. I believe in the Constitution. I believe in limited government, and I believe in the greatness of America. When this president went around the world at the beginning of his administration and apologized for America, I was appalled. This is the greatest nation in the history of the earth. The sacrifice of our sons and daughters is unequaled in world history. This is a sacrifice made to preserve liberty for ourselves and for others. This is a great nation. And there's no reason to be ashamed or to apologize for America. We are proud of America. You know, I also believe in the greatness of the American people. Now, I know it's fashionable in some corners to get a little discouraged sometimes about what you see other Americans do. And I think in part that's that the news and the things that we're drawn to are the unusual. And yet if you get a chance to do what I got the chance to do, which is to go around the country running a presidential campaign or in one, you get the chance to meet a lot of people and to learn a lot about them. And I've had the occasion, as you know, to be in business 25 years of my life. I joke that I spent 25 years in business. I was only governor 4 years. I never inhaled. I'm still a private sector guy. And so I got to meet people in the normal walks of life, in the real world. And then I went to the Olympics and got to meet young people from all over our country and all over the world. And then I became governor of my state and applied some of the same principles in governing a state that I had in business, which is taking on tough problems, cutting back excess, making tough choices. I was proud that we balanced the budget every year for 4 years. We lowered taxes 19 times. And when I was finished, we put in place a rainy day fund of over $2 billion. But, yeah, that would help, wouldn't it? But what I drew most from these experiences was the confidence I have in the American people and the greatness of the American spirit. I remember one day I was in my office. I was serving as governor. It was toward the end of my term. And we got a call from the airport. And they said that a soldier's body was being returned to our state, coming in on a U.S. air flight, but that the family had not been able to be notified in time to get there to receive the body. And the family had asked if I would come to the airport to receive that body. Of course, I said yes. We drove over to the airport, and the police car took me out on the tarmac, and the jet came in, the people disembarked, and then the luggage came down the conveyor, and then finally the casket came down the conveyor. And the state troopers who were there with me, they all saluted, and I put my hand on my heart. And I happened to glance up at the terminal. There's a big wall of glass at the U.S. Air Terminal in Boston, right where we had come in, or where this plane had come in. And the people coming off the plane, they'd seen all the cop cars, so they'd lined up to see what in the heck was going on. And then people walking down the hall, they saw the people against the glass, so they pulled in behind them. Huge crowd up there as I looked up there. Every single person I saw had their hand on their heart. And I couldn't see tears through that glass, but I could see the faces. The sincerity, the appreciation, the love for the sacrifice of that great soldier. We are a patriotic people. We face extraordinary challenges. The American people rise to the occasion. They ask for one thing, a leader that will tell them the truth, who will live with integrity, and who will actually lead them in the direction that we need to go to preserve this great union. Now, we've lost a couple of years, but we haven't lost our way. The principles that made America the hope of the earth are the principles that will keep us the great shining city on a hill. It's time for us to come together and to carry our message across this country that we're taking back America. We're restoring those principles that made America the great nation that it is. Because we believe in America, we're going to keep America strong, the hope of the earth, worthy of the great sacrifice of those men and women who sacrifice for us even today. Thank you so much. Good to be with you today. Thank you. Thanks, you guys. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairman of the Colorado Faith and Freedom Coalition, John Rabstead.
Good evening. It still feels like a concert in here. Well, I'd like to introduce to you tonight a great warrior in the conservative cause, Ron Paul. That's right, you can clap for Ron, he's great. 4 years ago, he burst onto the scene in the Republican presidential primary. His fidelity to the Constitution and his vision of our founding fathers just has no peer in our movement. He's been fighting for conservative principles, limited government, individual liberty, personal responsibility in his 30 years that he's served this country. Paul remains today one of the foremost advocates in Congress for limiting the size and scope of government and a defender of personal liberty. Please give a warm welcome to Ron Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a delight to be here tonight. I can't imagine people staying up this late to listen to politicians, believe me. But it's great to be here, and it's a great theme tonight, talking about freedom and faith. I cannot imagine any two more important issues of that, because I frequently will say throughout my campaigning and rallies that we've had that the goal of all political activity is liberty. And what is the purpose of having this liberty? Well, the purpose of liberty, as far as I'm concerned, is to allow creative energy to be released for us to then seek virtue and excellence, because governments can't provide virtue and excellence. You have to have a free society so we as individuals can assume that responsibility. You know, life is precious. I'm an OB doctor. I've delivered over 4,000 babies. And there are some of my friends who take a different position on the life issue. And they claim that the mother, you've heard all the arguments, the mother's life is precious. You can't interfere with her and her body. But as an OB doctor, let me tell you, life does begin at conception. And also, it's very legal. If I, as a physician, do something wrong and injure the fetus, I can rightfully be sued because of the rights of the fetus. If the fetus is injured in an accident or a homicide, there is a homicide because of the fetus being killed. So there is no doubt in my mind about the respect that we should have for life. Why is this so important? Well, for most of us, we respect liberty and freedom. That's what we're engaged in, is protecting freedom. So if we do not have high respect for life, how can we be dealing with our personal freedom, our personal privacy, our rights to homeschool our kids, and the right to pick our religion and make personal choices on what we do? It would be impossible if you don't have high regards and respect for life, and then respect for liberty, because without liberty, we do not have what has made this country so great. We live in difficult times today because I think there's been a total rejection of some of these basic principles that have made America great. I was in the military during the 1960s. I was in the Air Force for 5 years. But the 60s were rough times. We were engaged in, unfortunately, an undeclared war. And it was tragic in the sense of life lost. But cultural changes were occurring, and that is when abortion, became, commonplace. So the people changed before the laws changed. So morality has a lot to do with legislation. We don't have abortions today because the law permits it. That's made it worse. But the law accommodated the social changes that occurred. It was the breakdown of our social system at that time. The war had something to do with it. The drug culture had something to do with it. And of course, this move toward making life so careless and accepting the notion of abortion. But during this period of time, there was a rejection of the family as well. It started off, then the statistics came out, and they started to show that minorities were having more babies out of wedlock. But now it's cultural. I mean, it is getting to be epidemic that the family values and the families have broken down, and this is where our real problems come from. We would like to think all we have to do is elect the right politicians and everything is going to be okay. But believe me, the government is a reflection of the people. That's why the burden is on people like you to make sure that we have those values. But the family is something that's very important. It's ingrained in our Christian heritage. There's, in the Constitution, one of the provisions that I cite the most frequently is Article 1, Section 8, because that tells you everything we're allowed to do. The rest of the things we're not allowed to do, and the 9th and 10th Amendment, of course, confirms that belief. But there's a biblical passage in the Old Testament. It's 1 Samuel chapter 8. So I remember that, the first chapter of Samuel, 1 Samuel in chapter 8. Now that is the provision. I'm sure that you have heard of it before, because this is when, after the Israelites came out of Egypt, they had accepted God as their king. and that's what they lived by. They did not have a king. What they had were judges. It was a patriarchal society. It was a family-driven society, but there were always going to be arguments and conflicts. So these conflicts were taken not to the government, but to somebody that was chosen to be a judge and a respected person that respected the law and respected their traditions. But a time came, there was always temptation, even as the Israelites were leaving Egypt, that there was the temptation to drift away from the belief in God. But there was this effort made under Samuel. The people came and said, you know, we want somebody to take care of us. We want a king. And Samuel strongly objected to it. He explained to him, you do not want a king. That will substitute for God. And he said, and he predicts in this, you need to read that chapter because he predicts what happens if you have a king. He said, the king will take your young people, your young men to fight war, the young women to be used in the government. They're going to tax you and they're going to overburden you, and you will have to work so much time, like 25, 35, 45% of the time for the king. And I got to thinking, you know, it was astute wisdom and astute advice, but isn't that essentially what we have done today? I don't think we need a king, and we don't need Washington to act as if they're the king in this country. But today there is so much dependency on the government, and it's cradle to grave, and we have so little confidence in ourselves. We believe that if we don't have the safety net and we don't have the government there, if we don't have medical care taken care of, if we don't have the government schools, everything would fall apart. We have, as a people, lost our confidence and understanding of what true liberty is all about and where it comes from. And it doesn't come from our king. It doesn't come from our government. Our liberties come from our Creator. That's where our life and liberty comes from. But it was advised by the founders at the time that the Constitution would not work if we did not remain a moral society. And we're at the crossroads right now because we have lived beyond our means. We have become totally dependent. We do all the things that we shouldn't do and don't do the things we should do. What are we doing? You just take, for instance, our foreign policy. When's the last time we declared war? When's the last time we won a war outright? It's been a long time ago. We do need, in the Constitution, a strong national defense. We should have a strong national defense, and we're allowed to defend ourselves. But the obligation is to be the Congress, through the people. When we have an enemy that we have to go after, we should declare the war and win the war and not have these perpetual wars and allowing our president to go into places like Libya without even telling us about it. But faith and freedom is a crucial item. We must have the faith that generates an understanding of what true liberty is about. But we also have to have confidence and an understanding about the proper foreign policy, a constitutional foreign policy, but an understanding of free market economics. What about a biblical understanding about what honest money is about? What about honest weights and measures and no paper currency and no Federal Reserve that destroys our currency? There's nothing moral about our financial system and our monetary system. And this recent breakdown of our system is proof positive of it. Because it was predictable that there was a bubble out there. Many predicted it, that it would come and it would burst, and it did. But guess what? Washington panicked, and they said, you know, the end of the world is coming. So what we must do is we must tax the people and spend more money and borrow more money and print more money, and that's going to get us out of trouble. But they didn't ask, how did we get into this trouble? Well, we spent too much, we borrowed too much, we regulated too much, and we printed too much, and they thought that was going to help. But it doesn't work that way. Honest money means that you can't counterfeit money. There's a good little booklet called The Law by Bastiat, and he teaches a principle that you as an individual or the government can't do anything that you as an individual can't do. But you're not allowed to counterfeit. Why do we allow the government to counterfeit? That's why government is so big. They don't have to be responsible. And we don't need to raise the national debt so that they're just encouraged to spend more money. But they should not be allowed to just print the money because it is immoral. And it is the encouragement for big government. There hasn't been a war fought in the many, many centuries without debasing the currency. Since the crash of 2008, our dollar actually has been devalued 50% against gold. So therefore, look out for trouble. And the odds of us cutting back over in the hill and live sensibly aren't very good. So we are going to be challenged. We're going to be challenged because we will not be able to depend on our king. The king's time has run out, and guess who you're going to have to depend on? You're going to have to depend on yourself, your family, your friends, your neighbors, and your church to be prepared. It will be challenging. There is no doubt about it. But the reason why we should be optimistic about this is we have great traditions. We know something about sound money, private property, contract rights, and it's not quite like the kind of problems that the Soviet system met. But we will. We're overextended internationally. We cannot be the peacemaker of the world. We cannot be nation building because we don't have the money. At times when I think about what we need to do, everybody that wants to tell you what to do, you'll have to sacrifice. Well, you know what? I don't tell the people I talk to that it's up to you you have to sacrifice. You might have to go to work and take care of yourself, but what would it be like if you had less regulation, no income tax, and sound money? That's not a sacrifice. That means you could take care of yourself a lot easier. The people that ought to be sacrificing are the people who ripped us off in the building up of the bubble, and then we went and bailed them out, and they're making big bucks again, and we don't. And the people who are suffering as the middle class, they lost their jobs, they lost their mortgages, and lost their houses. A moral society would not let that happen. We need to believe once again in the principles of liberty. We need to understand why the family is the bedrock. The educational system should be through the family and the church. We should be promoting homeschooling and private schooling and not depending on our public school system. But the good news is I have been speaking out a lot in the last couple of years, especially around the country and with a lot of young people, and I spot a lot of young people here. The burden is falling on the young people, but it's not the next generation. It's this generation. It's right here today, so we have to deal with our problems. But there's a lot of enthusiasm for the renewal of the concept of personal liberty and the concept of our Constitution and those things that have made America great. And I thank you very much. Thank you.
And please welcome back to the stage the founder and chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Ralph Reed.
Be seated. Be seated. Don't go anywhere. Stop these people from leaving. Close the doors to the ballroom. Has this not been an incredible night? Wow. I have been doing this for longer than I care to acknowledge, and I think we have just had one of the most incredible evenings of exciting conservative leadership I've ever seen, and I don't know who you're going to decide your nominee is going to be, but it's going to be a hard decision. Now, we're getting ready to bring Dick Morris back up for Dick Morris Unplugged. Actually, he was a little unplugged earlier, so I'm concerned about what's going to happen now. But I did want to share some news that was disappointing, but we have great hope, and I want to raise something that I want you to be praying about. And we're going to take just a moment right here and pause and pray. I think many of you know that Glenn Beck was scheduled to be with us this evening. We learned a few hours ago that his father-in-law was rushed to the hospital, and Glenn obviously needed to be with his wife and with his father-in-law. And so what I'd like us to do right now is, if you don't mind, I'd like for us to bow our heads and pray for Glenn and his family and his father-in-law. Father, we intervene right now into this situation involving Glenn Beck's father-in-law. We know that you're the great physician and that you can heal all things. We ask you to touch this man even now in this hospital room and heal him and make him complete. We pray for Glenn. We pray for his wife. We thank you for all they've done and all they've sacrificed. And I pray that you would give them and the rest of the family great comfort in this situation, and that you would be glorified by the outcome. And we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. So be praying for Glenn and his family, and I will see you guys bright and early in the morning, but you don't want to miss Dick Morris Unplugged. He'll be coming up in just a second.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the Vice President of the Iowa Faith and Freedom Coalition, Gopal Krishna.
It's an honor for me to start the late night special of the FFC conference. Let me share with you how to increase the number of Republicans. When a baby is born, it cries. That is the first sign to the parents that the baby could be a Democrat. If the baby's parents give everything whenever the baby cries, the baby will grow up and stay as a Democrat. If the baby's parents feed the baby only when it is needed, soon the baby realizes that it is better to save energy and quits crying. The baby grows up as a Republican. Dick Morris is one of America's greatest modern political minds and commentators, a regular contributor to the Fox News Network. Dick Morris has authored numerous best-selling books. His most recent book, Revolt: How to Defeat Obama and Repeal His Socialist Programs. Please welcome author, public commentator, and the leading Obama critic, Dick Morris.
Okay, so after Winston Churchill won World War II, he was defeated by the Labor Party, the Socialist Party, under the leadership of Clement Attlee. And Attlee, the first thing he did when he took power was nationalize everything he could find in Britain. So about a year later, Churchill was in the men's room at the House of Commons. And Attlee walked in, and Churchill scooted down 3 urinals and put his jacket over here. And Attlee said, "Shy, Winston?" And Churchill said, "No, it is not that at all. It is just that whenever you see anything that is big and impressive, you nationalize it." True story. You know, we've seen a parade of some very capable people who are running for president. And there were some excellent ones, and I think a great many of them would defeat Barack Obama. But I would like just to have us all pay a tribute to a great man, a great American, who is not running for president. And he's my personal favorite, my personal hero, Mike Huckabee. I don't talk in public about my own spiritual journey. My political journey is complicated enough. But I went from being his political consultant to his being my spiritual advisor. The day I got back from Chicago after my scandal, waiting there for me, Federal Express, was a Bible with my name on it sent to me by Mike Huckabee. After a few months, I got to it on my reading list. So what I wanted to do tonight is just take questions about anything. China, Libya, what's going on in the Middle East, Israel, our economy, gas prices, Obama's political vulnerability, sizing up the various candidates for president, the future of the abortion, pro-life, pro-choice debate, anything you want to ask me about. And that's what they mean by unplugged. Sometimes they say I'm unhinged, but now it's just unplugged. So I'd love to take questions on anything you want to ask. Yes? There's a mic there.
On occasion, when I have an opportunity to discuss politics or programs with the political rivals, our platform or some of the proposals are to cut corporate taxes, okay? Because we're, what, second in the world in our corporate taxes. Right. And the rebuttal we get from these people is, well, how can you cut the taxes of Exxon and GE when they're making billions and billions of dollars in profit? Why should they get a cut in corporate taxes?
Right.
How do we rebut that in a proper manner?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. The drug companies make a pretty sizable profit, about 17%. But half of that goes into research for new medicines. The U.S. government funds basic research through the National Science Foundation. But the National Science Foundation and the Institute of Health grants, NIH grants, are basically for basic scientific research, like the genome code and stuff like that, not stuff aimed at finding something that cures cancer or that, retards heart disease. And that comes from the profits of the drug companies. So the more you tax, the less they're going to have to spend. And the oil companies right now obviously are making out like bandits. They're doing incredibly well. But let's remember that the more money they have, the more they can spend on research and development and exploration and development. It costs one hell of a lot of money to prospect for oil, to try to find out where it is, to drill it up. And we also have to understand that we have this exciting, wonderful, magnificent new technology called fracking, where there are these, we know that we have more oil than Saudi Arabia does, but it's stuck in shale rock 160 feet down deep in the earth. So the scientists, with these profits, have developed a technique of pushing down high-pressure water 160 feet and then horizontally shooting it at the rock, breaking open the rock and releasing the oil and the gas underneath. But that's an expensive process. That takes a bunch of money. And one of the reasons why the Arabs are self-defeating for letting the price of oil go up is the higher it goes up, the more we can afford to do stuff like that to increase oil production. So it's too simplistic to say tax the corporations because so much of that profit is invested in an important way. On the other hand, I do believe that this budget deal they're negotiating should include a reduction in the corporate tax rate and a revenue-neutral elimination of certain exemptions. I think we'd be much better off if we decreased the money that the oil companies and drug companies and others can make profit-free and decrease the corporate tax rate as long as it's revenue-neutral. But it has to be revenue-neutral. We don't want to increase taxes. While I'm on the subject, my wife always says, sometimes I can be asked one question and talk all night. But when we talk about the need not to increase taxes right now, We are not just speaking about a bunch of people that don't want to spend more money. And we're not talking about an economy that would be hurt by taking more tax revenue out of it. The stakes are much higher than that. When Obama became president, he knew that he couldn't increase taxes, but he wanted to increase the size of government. So what he did was that he borrowed a huge amount of money. And he knew that the more he borrowed, the more pressure there would be for a tax increase. I believe Ronald Reagan ran deficits in the early 80s to make it impossible for liberals to vote more spending. I believe Barack Obama ran deficits in the last 2 years to try to force conservatives to vote for higher taxes so that they could lock in the higher level of government spending. Governor Romney alluded to some of the data, but when Obama took office, the federal, state, and local share combined of our economy was 35%. It had been 30 to 35 for really 40 years, and we were second to Japan, that was 32%. Now, it's not 35 anymore, it's 44. We're above Greece, for God's sakes. We're above Portugal. We're above socialist countries like Germany and Britain in the share of our economy that goes to government. And when you have this elephant in the middle of your room soaking up 44% of the income, there is no room for private enterprise. It can't function. Except I didn't mean elephant, I meant jackass. Yeah.
You said we could ask anything, right?
Sure can. I might hide under the podium.
Just before you go to bed at night, on some nights, do you ever regret getting Bill Clinton elected?
The answer to your question is damn right. Fortunately, it's not my only regret about those years. Yep.
Do you think that this nation is ready to elect a female president?
Okay, let me get to that in one sec. I just want to go back to yours. You said why. Clinton did a good job in balancing the budget, cut the capital gains tax, reformed welfare, and I wish we had those policies there now as opposed to Obama. He believed in the free market system. But he had no coherent governing philosophy. He had a variety of goals. He wanted to cut unemployment to here, increase income growth to here, reduce racism in the country, lower welfare rolls, cut crime. There were statistical goals, but no substantive goals, no underlying philosophy about it. And I think that that was a real lack, and I think that the Republican Party could have done much better, as I look back in retrospect. Now, that's the easy question you asked me. The hard question some people ask me is who would have been a better president, Obama or Hillary? And when I'm asked that question, here's the reply I give. Hillary! And that segues into your question about a woman president. The gauntlet that a woman has to run to get elected to public office in this country is mind-boggling. And it is absolutely incredible. Stuff is asked of a woman that would never be asked of a man. Could you imagine Joe Biden being asked, what newspapers do you read? Could you imagine Charlie Gibson asking Joe Biden, what do you think of the Bush doctrine? You know, in an effort to trap him on it. I mean, it just wouldn't happen. Could you imagine a man being asked if his grandchild is his own, or in fact his grandchild? Never happened. Never, never happened. So the baptism of fire that actually both Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin have been through is absolutely daunting. The mere fact that Hillary deserved worse and Sarah less doesn't mitigate the amount of anger that was generated at her. And I think we have very different standards for men and for women. And frankly, those standards are more maintained by women than by men. And I've always tried to understand why, and I'm not sure I've really succeeded. But the best I can do is that men do not look to other men to be role models. Okay, you know, when Kennedy was president, we all were doing this and inventing Massachusetts accents. But we don't look at a Romney or a Reagan and say, I want to be like him. We look at him and say, I support him. But women really are conditioned to read magazines and adopt fashion and model themselves after other women. It's kind of a part of their upbringing. And I think that therefore they personalize their view of the woman candidate. We'll come around to you. We personalize the view of the woman candidate in a way that we don't of the male candidate. So I was really shocked 2 or 3 days ago. We had a house guest over for dinner, Sue Kelly, who was a congresswoman from Westchester who lost her seat, a Republican congresswoman. And I said proudly to her that I've been talking a lot to Michelle Bachmann, who I think would be a terrific candidate. And she turned on me with a venom. And she said, don't you help Michelle Bachmann. And I said, what do you have against her? And she said, nothing, she's great. But you can't elect a woman and you'll re-elect that son of a whatever. and that really rocked me back a little bit. And I was really surprised about that. And we have to see where that goes. But clearly, the difficulty of electing a woman is far greater than of electing a man. Yeah. You're next.
Thank you. Mr. Morris, I'm sure that taxes are going to be talked ad infinitum in this campaign. I would like to have your opinion of your evaluation of the fair tax.
I think the fair tax is a fine idea. But I think it's a very dangerous idea in our current political system. He's next. Which is because what will happen is they'll pass the fair tax, which is a VAT tax, basically. Each time a transaction goes on, there's a consumption tax. Not hidden the way it is in Europe, but still. But they're not going to repeal the, 16th Amendment, the 17th, the Income Tax Amendment. They're not going to repeal that. And then what will happen is a few years later, they'll vote an income tax. They won't replace the income tax, they'll supplement it. That's how in Europe they got to have a 20% VAT tax in addition to income tax rates that are higher than ours. And I think what Obama's going to pull is if we re-elect him, he's going to say, I hear the demand of the people and the conservatives for a fair tax, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. But he's not going to change the income tax. While we're on the subject, let me talk about the flat tax a little bit. I would love to see the United States Congress pass a law, and I hope the new administration does, to create a voluntary tax alternative to the current system. If you want to go ahead and fill out that long form, an income tax form this wide, and pay your accountant thousands and tens of thousands of dollars a year, you go right ahead. We're not going to change the current law. But if you want to file a form this thick, this long, and 1 paper wide, and pay 20% of your income in taxes, that's cool. No deductions, no exemptions, no nothing. And when the IRS comes to you and says, how did you spend your money? You say MYOB, mind your own business. I'm paying a flat 20%, and it is none of your business how I spent my money. And I believe that what would happen if we did that is that increasingly more and more taxpayers would migrate to the flat tax form, and then eventually everybody would. Because they learned that even if they're going to save 2% or 3%, it isn't worth it with the accountants and the audits and all of that stuff. It's a lot easier just to pay it. And I think that you'll never get a bill passed to eliminate those deductions and lower the rates, because the special interests will go crazy. But if you make it voluntary, individual people will migrate to that system, and I think it really will help and really will pass. While we're on the subject of taxes, the most pernicious thing that is going on now, this is the real danger we face, is that what Geithner and Obama and Biden want to do in these debt limit talks is they want to say, okay, we will cut spending in order to raise the debt limit. We'll grant you a $2 trillion cut in spending and a $2 trillion debt limit. We'll couple those. We'll go along with that. We got religion. And we'll set up targets. In the first year, there should be a $500 billion cut. In the second year, a $1 trillion cut, a $1.5 trillion, and a $2 trillion. And we will say that if you don't meet those targets, there is an automatic across-the-board cut in spending. Oh, and an increase in taxes. And what they're planning to do is to set up an automatic tax trigger, a tax trigger with no human hands touching it. No congressman votes for it, no senator votes for it. They say, I voted for deficit reduction targets, and I told them they should meet it, and then they didn't, and taxes went up, and I was against it, but it was automatic. And that is what he's trying to do. That was put forward by Kent Conrad 2 years ago. We warned about it in our book, 2010, Take Back America, and in the current book, Revolt, because that's how the left is going to try to play this deficit. And we have to be very conscious to oppose that. This gentleman.
We're bringing more of the Faith and Freedom Conference, continuing tomorrow with former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum, who's expected to make his presidential campaign announcement on Monday, and Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli. I'll bring you tomorrow's events on the C-SPAN networks. And in about 2 hours, you can watch some of the earlier remarks at the Faith and Freedom Conference here on C-SPAN. We'll bring you more speakers just prior to Washington Journal tomorrow morning. And you can find them online anytime at the C-SPAN Video Library. Tomorrow on Washington Journal, McClatchy newspaper's correspondent Kevin Hall